Hello, and welcome to Philosophy 1, Introduction to Philosophy. Let's get started. Normally in a face-to-face course, I would have you fill out 3x5 cards. Obviously, we can't do that here, so we'll skip that bit. Let me begin by talking about what we're going to be doing. First thing to say, and this may sound perhaps foolish, but I want to say it. This is not 13th and 14th grade. You are in your freshman, sophomore year. Why would anyone even suggest this? Well, there's a history. There was a time, about 50 years ago, in which the community colleges were basically under the governance of the public school boards. So LACCD, community college district, did not exist. The community colleges, such as they were at that time, were under LA Unified, the equivalent of LA Unified, LACCD school boards. And this was true not only in Los Angeles, but throughout the state of California. And that changed. So literally, freshman and sophomore year in community college used to be 13th and 14th grade. And I think sometimes this mentality still persists in even strange places. I'll let the cat out of the bag here. I've been teaching philosophy here at Southwest College for more than a quarter century, past my first quarter century, rounding out to my first third of a century. And I love doing it. But my appointment is as an adjunct, which means I'm underemployed and underpaid. So what I did all these years, it's kind of like musicians who have to have a day job in order to be able to pay for their gig, which they really want to do at night. I worked for LA Unified. And I had a colleague who was an assistant in my classroom who wanted to come to Southwest College and become a teacher. So he came here, and he was told by his counselor here at college, "Oh, don't worry about it. It's no big deal. This is just Southwest College. It's just 13th and 14th grade." This was probably 10, 15 years ago. I was outraged. How dare that counselor, never found out who it was, how dare that counselor short sell, what we're doing here, what your time is worth here, and mine as well. This is not just an extension of the public schools. Fortunately, my friend and colleague persisted. He went through and he got his AA degree from Southwest College here. By the way, there's only one thing you want to get out of Southwest College, and that is out of Southwest College with an AA degree. I'll come back to that point in a minute. That's having an AA degree is very important. But he went on then to Cal State Dominguez Hills and finished his bachelor's degree, did a teaching credential, and came to work as a teacher. And when I retired from LA Unified 2 years ago, he was working in a classroom side by side with me. So the story had a happy ending, but it was kind of off-putting in the beginning. And I want you not to think of what you're doing as something trivial or just an extension of K through 12. It isn't. This is not 13th and 14th grade. And one of the things you're going to find is that in higher education, governance is different. You're not the boss of me. Absolutely not. I'm not your boss. I'm your professor. That's a very different thing. I'm not going to Mickey Mouse. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I mean, I'm here to give you a course of instruction and to examine you, and hopefully then you'll get a transcript grade and credit for the course. But that's a far cry from me riding herd over you. I like this term. Oh, perhaps I should translate. This is a Japanese term, sensei. And believe it or not, you can't see my big belly now, but I have one. I used to be a judoka when I was an undergraduate, and we called our teacher sensei, which means one who has come before. If you want to think of it in kinship terms, a sensei is less like a father, more like an older brother. Somebody who knows the ropes and can teach you by showing you how to do things and also showing you what not to do, showing where the pitfalls are, showing where the bodies are buried. And I kind of think of a teacher in higher ed as a sensei. Of course, it's immodest to refer to oneself as a sensei, so I won't. One of the things that this means practically for you is if you have gotten used to hand-holding in K through 12, get unused to it in higher ed. There's a retired psychology professor named Drew Appleby who's done a study of this with his students. I thought that it was just my eccentricity to be worried about 13th and 14th grade. It turns out it's not just my eccentricity. Appleby also worries about it. And at the end of the freshman year with his students, he asks them, okay, you've been through college now for a year. How is it different from high school? Here are some of the answers he got. I don't believe in reading PowerPoints to you, but the type is a little small here. Let me go ahead and read these. One of the students said, college teachers expect more from you. There are no late assignments or makeup tests. They do not hold your hand. Another one said, the biggest difference between high school teachers and college professors is that you have to learn by yourself in college. High school teachers tell students what to do the next day. College professors expect students to read what's in the syllabus. High school teachers told us our assignments. College professors tell us to read the syllabus. College teachers don't tell you what you're supposed to do. They give you a syllabus and expect you to follow what it says. High school teachers tell you about 5 times what you're supposed to do. And now that the subject of the syllabus has come up, let's just take a minute and look at our syllabus for this semester. If you have a paper copy, the syllabus is available on the website, and also I have emailed you a PDF version, so you can print a paper copy if you want. I always used, some things are still good to have on paper. I think this is one of them. But if you have it in hand, or if you can view it electronically, let's just go through it. First of all, this is a very short syllabus, as you'll notice. Here, I'm holding a paper copy. It's 2 pages, 1 page front and back, okay? Not all syllabi are like this. Some instructors have 10-page, 20-page syllabi. This is getting to be more and more common. Some of them have schedules week by week by week. I don't, for a reason I'll explain. But basically, a syllabus is 2 things. The first thing it is, and by the way, a syllabus is something you've probably seen before because you should get it every class, first day of class. And with any luck, you'll go over the mechanics of it as we're doing here. Syllabus is 2 things. First, it is a contract. And secondly, it's a roadmap. It's a roadmap in that it tells you where we're going to go. Again, some more detailed than others. I don't give a week-by-week schedule because I know where we're going to go. And I know, based on experience, we'll get there eventually. We've got enough time. But this is also a philosophy class, and I like to leave room for discussion. So you may have noticed I'm the sort of person who likes to talk. I am. And they even give me a little bit of money for it. But I can shut up if you unmute your mic and or raise your hand in face-to-face. I'll shut up and you can have the floor. So we might get some discussions going, and that's fine. I don't mind taking class time, and if we don't finish the lecture that I prepared for that particular day, it's not a big deal. So I don't want to impose that kind of external schedule. I just have a sense based on experience that we're going to finish. Purpose of the course. First of all, the course intends to acquaint you with philosophy, and usually in face-to-face classes at this point, I ask for a show of hands if anybody has had philosophy before, and usually it's 1 or 2 people, if anyone at all. So I'm going to assume, even if there are in fact a few people who have taken a philosophy course here and there, I'm going to assume that you're all starting from scratch, and so we'll proceed that way. Philosophy is an intellectual discipline, academic discipline, that consists of asking questions in 1 or more of 3 problem areas. And I'm just going to name those problem areas for you now. I'm not going to explain them, but I will at some length next lecture. Those 3 problems areas are metaphysics, ethics, and epistemology. And if you're doing philosophy, then you are doing a problem in 1 or more of those 3 areas. And when you come away from this course, what you should expect is you'll be able to define philosophy by describing its scope from its origins in ancient Greece to the present. You'll also be able to talk about some key philosophical problems. Let's go on to reading. Education is reading, period. This is so both in the narrow sense that you have a text to go over, but it's also reading in the metaphorical sense of learning to interpret and analyze. We have 1 sole assigned text this semester. It is the custom edition for our campus of a classic reader by Louis Poyman called Classics of Philosophy, and I'll defer discussion of that to a little bit down the road today, and look at it in some detail. But it is important for you to have a copy of the texts we're going to be reading. And whether you do this on paper or online, or whether you buy a copy of the book or you get photocopies or downloads or whatever the case may be, important to have that reading. We're not going to start reading for a couple of weeks. When we do, I will not assign you a reading assignment to do before class. Rather, we will read together in class. And again, get a little too ahead of myself here, but basically we're going to be reading some of the classic texts of the philosophical tradition. So this is not a textbook in the usual sense to which you might have become accustomed in, for example, sociology class. You have chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. There are no chapters here. There are just primary source documents. So we'll read some of the fragments from the pre-Socratics. That's all we have of the pre-Socratics. We're going to read a couple of dialogues by Plato. We're going to read a major work by René Descartes. We're going to read part of a major work by Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, and discuss those throughout the term. Evaluation. I don't believe in, and this is part of what I mean by saying I'm not going to Mickey Mouse and hold hands. I don't believe in doing a lot of examinations. Teachers pretty much all know exams have very serious limits. I would prefer, if I had my way, to dispense with examinations at all. If you go up to school at Oxford, you go up for 3 years. That's a 3-year degree for the bachelor's degree. We do 4 years in this country, and you do not take courses. You do not have exams. You're assigned a tutor. You're expected to meet with your tutor once a week and usually write a paper and discuss it with the tutor. But a lot of students blow off their tutorials. A lot of tutors blow off their tutorials. But the point is, after 3 years, you don't take any exams. You sit the one final exam. Schools, it's called. And your outcome can either be pass, fail, or pass with honors. And then if you pass or pass with honors, you get your degree. And if not, you're sent down. I would actually prefer to do a system like that, but the British students who do this are well prepared for that. American students, I think, are not well prepared for that sort of scheme. So I will accommodate, and my accommodation is we have 2 exams this semester. We have a, let's say, first exam. I don't want to call it a midterm because it may or may not happen actually at the exact midpoint of the term. I'll let you know when we're ready for it. And then there will be a final exam. The final exam is set by the schedule. The midterm exam, again, is whenever, just roughly sometime in the middle of the term. When I've done face-to-face courses, I've had a reading exam for the first exam and an essay exam for the second. Now that we're going online, I've modified that, so both exams will be essay exams. And what I will do is I will give you essay questions, perhaps a week, 10 days, maybe even longer, in advance. And you'll write your essays, and we'll talk about that more, when we get to that point. So, exams are obligations, and they're not obligations to me so much as they're obligations to your fellow students, because grades in this class will be based on the curve. So, please don't ever come into any class that I teach, this one or any other, and say, "Oh, I missed a midterm. What's the makeup?" Because then I got to do this. You know what that is? That is the world's smallest violin, and what tune is it playing? My heart bleeds for you. Or if I were a profane person, which I'm not, I would say, like the Marine Corps gunny says, "You want sympathy? I'll tell you where to find sympathy. It's in the dictionary. It's between shit and syphilis." But of course, since I'm not a profane person, I didn't say that. I just quoted the gunny who does say that. But let's please not get to that point. Other than that, I'm pretty easygoing. Exams are obligations. The other thing, though, about which I'm not easygoing is this: academic honesty and dishonesty. The usual norms apply, and I think everybody should know what they are. They're common sense. I will have some videos for you down the road. I'll give you the URLs to those. They're on YouTube. But be aware, if you're not already, and it's in the syllabus in front of you, the Community College District has a very firm policy on academic dishonesty. It's there for you to read. Now, I always hesitate to give this bit of the talk because I consider myself an honest person, and I want to treat other people in the same way until or unless they give me evidence otherwise. So I hope here that I'm preaching to the choir, but I also want to say forewarned is forearmed. I am really easygoing about most things. About this and about exam obligations, I am very hard case. So please don't find that out the hard way. And that's all I want to say on that subject. There's a blurb there about disabilities, DSPS. If you're in touch with them, get in touch with me about that. We'll make accommodations accordingly. Finally, do you have any questions? If you do, ask. And class time is possible, but office hours are probably better. I keep office hours for half an hour before class starts every day. But more than that, I've always done this. Look at the front of the syllabus. I give you, first of all, my private number, and secondly, my email address. And use the email address first. The private number is for, just to get a timestamp, but I don't really check that all that often. However, I check my email constantly. It's like instant messaging. And I would say use my Earth-like address that you see at the top of the syllabus in preference to my college address. I'll look at them both, but I'll look at the private one first and more frequently. So that if you have a question, I can turn it around and answer to you, fairly quickly. And should it prove necessary to miss an exam, and I understand, I'm told you guys have classes other than mine. Is that true? And that you have like lives and family and jobs. I've heard that rumor. Well, yes, I understand life intrudes. Okay, if it does, you have an exam obligation. If you contact me in advance of the exam, then we can talk and I'll work out an accommodation. Please don't call me after the fact, or don't waltz into my classroom, as I said, because then I gotta be a hard guy, which I will be. I don't like to do it, but I will be. But let's not go there. You've got the wherewithal to contact me very frequently, and I find that this works. I do keep office hours, but I think back when I was a student, and when I had a question from my professor, it didn't always conveniently occur whenever he had posted office hours. But I've always made myself available to you, and some of my colleagues in the past have said, "What, you give the students your phone number?" And yeah, students are adults; they're responsible. Nobody has ever called me in all these years at 3 a.m. with an urgent philosophy question. So use your discretion, and we'll all be fine. Okay, so any questions on the syllabus? Do let me know. It is a contract, though, and I stress it's a roadmap. It's also a contract. Now, I get to set the terms of the contract, but a contract is an agreement that binds all parties. So if I say to you, as I do, there will be 2 and only 2 exams. There will be no credit for chair time. I don't take attendance, any of that kind of stuff. You can take that to the bank. I won't all of a sudden come in one day and say, "Oh, pop quiz." No. I've set up the terms in advance. If you agree to stay with the course, then you, as a student, also agree to be bound by the terms. So have a look at it, and if there are any questions, again, email me is the best way to handle those. Okay, so I mentioned that because the notion of syllabus comes up. That's a very, very important thing in higher ed that one doesn't encounter in high school. I won't be hand-holding. I don't like Mickey Mouse. So again, there's a lot of Mickey Mouse that goes on in K-12. There's a lot less that's going to go on in higher education. Let's go back to Applebee's students. Here's another one. High school teachers teach you what's in your textbooks. College teachers expect you actually to read your textbooks. Yes. College teachers expect students to read the syllabus, and the classroom is set up to where to sink or swim. Do the work or fail. High school teachers reminded us about the deadlines for projects every day and tried to help us if we were struggling. Well, I don't think higher ed teachers don't try to help struggles. But the idea is that, increasingly your education is going to be your education. You need to take responsibility for it. We'll help where we can, but you need to do your part too. And whatever help an outsider can give is limited. More and more, you're going to find your education is your education. And another comment by Appleby students, the most important thing I've learned since I've been in college is that it's time for me to step out of the purgatory between my teenage years and adulthood and to take some responsibility for my life. Yeah, I couldn't say it better. So get ready for the cat shot. If you are new, you have just launched from USS High School. It's going to be challenging.
Here we go.
You are no longer sitting on the deck of the carrier, you are flying this thing. And expect to pull some G's. If this happens, don't be surprised. It's, as Fran Lebowitz said, there is no such thing as inner peace. There's only nervousness or death. So if you're feeling stress, it may be because you're paying attention. And if you worry about stress, do consider the alternative. Okay, now I want to shift gears and talk about some economic issues. I know this is philosophy class. My approach is what in Britain would be called PP&E, philosophy, politics, and economics. They're often combined. And maybe your econ teacher should be telling you this, but I kind of think that most econ profs are not, so it falls to me. First monetary topic. What if higher ed was tuition free? Believe it or not, there are places where, in fact, it is. In Germany, it was free for the longest time. They did a little experiment about a decade and a half ago, a decade and a half it is now. Modest tuition, about $600, $700 a year. Decided after a while that experiment wasn't working, went back to free. You know, the University of California was tuition free for California students up until 1968. From 1868, sorry, till 1970. Governor Reagan at the time introduced tuition, and it was about $600 at that point. It's, of course, much more now. But this raises the question, is education a social good, a collective good on the one hand, or is it a private good? Here's an eye-opening talk by an economist at Brown University, very smart guy, Mark Blythe. He's a very, very heavy Scottish accent, but you have to kind of, you know, maybe strange to hear, but what he says is worth hearing. So let's give him a listen.
So how much does it cost to do a master's degree in the United States just now? About $50,000 private, $30,000 if you go public. Why does it cost so much money? Well, because the privates can do it because they're very good and they can take talent from all over the world. And they also redistribute a lot internally because they've got money and all that. Why do the publics do it? Well, basically because states have been cutting taxes year after year for the past 30 years, and there's no money left in the kitty, so you end up jacking fees up. Now, let's say you want to do engineering, something that if you don't go into finance with your skills ends up benefiting society because you can build stuff and all that's really good, right? And you spend $30,000 and that's an investment over your lifetime and all that, and that's the way to look at it. In Germany, you get to go for free. In Germany, you can be an American. This is absolutely true. Check this out. You as an American can go there if you qualify for one of their engineering master's programs, and they will send you to the Goethe Institute for 6 months before you start so you learn German. You will then get a free education at the best technical universities probably in the world outside of MIT and Caltech. And then they'll let you stay because you will be a high tax paying productive member of society. How's that for different?
That's a lot different. Oh my God. So that sounds like, see, in America, for some reason, we see education spending or college spending as a cost instead of an investment. And it seems, but which it is an investment, and people don't understand that. So why should we pay for you to go to college? Because it's actually an investment in our own country. That's what you would say?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, although I'm not paying back the British exchequer for the money they invested in me, I'm paying a boatload of taxes here in the US, even if your overall tax rates are lower. Because I basically went from somebody that should have been either basically on drugs or in prison or in the army and ended up at an Ivy League in a professorship. Well, surely that benefits society as a whole, that I'm not out there mugging grandmothers. Instead, I'm out there educating their kids.
Ah. Education. Is it a luxury? Is it a mortgage? Is it a business? Or is it a right? How did education come to be viewed as a private good rather than a public good? Well, I mentioned Mr. Reagan and Mrs. Thatcher, neoliberal governance that's become increasingly central in the last several decades. Education is seen as a private good from this point of view. Why should we collectively, or we as the state, pay you because you're going to be earning some money? It's all about return on investment, ROI. Why should we pay costs for you to get ahead? On the other hand, as Mark Blythe suggests, we might see education instead as a public good, as an investment, yes. So you as the graduate don't pay a lot of money and don't mortgage your future to student debt, but you're going to be paying back a lot to the society as you become a highly skilled person and a major earner. There are 44 countries now, developed countries, in which higher education is tuition free. And Germany was mentioned, France, Greece, Scotland, et cetera, et cetera. There are a few major industrial countries not on the list. The US and Canada, Britain, and also Switzerland are among those. And what has happened in our country, for example, with tuition is that, as Mark Blythe suggests, as public spending has been cut, this is part of the Republican Revolution to shrink the tax base, strangle the beast, as Ronald Reagan put it, defund the state. Student debt has gone up because the cost of tuition has gone up. 7 in 10 college seniors in recent years, about $30,000 per borrower student debt. And some of it goes much higher than that. Some of that goes into the 6 figures. This is an eye-opening graph. If you look at the years between 1978 and 2012, and this graph tracks the increase in a number of major consumer items, including food in red, the consumer price index generally in gray, shelter costs in aqua, and they've all gone up about the same. Medical care, that's taken a little bit more steep jump up to 600%. What's the single highest? Tuition, 1,200% over that same period. That tells a story. In 1971, I was accepted among other places to UCLA. And I wasn't a California student, so I would have been paying more unless I'd gotten some financial aid. I'll tell you a little bit down the line my very checkered, motley story. But at this point, Mr. Reagan had just introduced, Governor Reagan had just introduced tuition. So UCLA charged $600 a year for California residents. I wanted to compare tuition in 1970, 71 with my college now, Southwest College. Problem is I couldn't, because in 1971, tuition in the community colleges still remained free. So I used a comparative figure from the community college I attended. I started my freshman year at Michigan State, and my sophomore year I spent in Key West at Florida Keys Community College. I paid all of $240 tuition that year for an entire year, sophomore year of education. By 2014, UCLA was about 13,000 some change per year. My little college, Florida Keys, remember I paid $240, $2,483 per year. And Southwest College now has tuition, and that tuition there was about half of what it is at my school, about 1,000 and some change. So UCLA has gone up 2,000% over the period 1971 to 2014, and my little college has gone up about 1,000%. So yeah, those are drastic increases. Okay, I want to tell you guys, you are smart because you're attending a community college. At least you're smart financially. Let's look at the costs here. Let's take 2 models. Let's say one model is you start here at community college, first 2 years, freshman, sophomore year, and then you matriculate to UCLA for junior and senior year. Okay, 2 years of community college, and this is not just tuition, this is all expenses. $11,000 a year, it's going to cost you $23,000 and some change. 2 years at USC is going to cost you a total of $81,000. A total of $58,000 for a total 4-year total of $81,000. Whereas if you went to UC for all 4 years, $116,000. So what's the difference? Well, by going 2 years in community college, you save $35 and some change. That is, think about the average student debt, $30,000. You're saving a little more than the average student debt by doing first 2 years in community college. Now, as I say, you're smart. There are some other advantages as well. You have to forgive me. I'm a foreigner. That's right. I was not born in California. I immigrated here, but I've lived here more than half my life. And they say if once you've been in California 5 years, you're kind of grandfathered as a native. So I guess maybe I am after all. But when I first came to California, I was amazed at the folk wisdom of the native population. It went something like this. Perhaps you've heard the same story. Well, if you're really smart, you get to go to UC. If you can't get into UC, well, there's always Cal States. You can do that. Or if you can't get in there, then you have to settle for a junior college. You ever heard that one? Yeah. Well, I've been around the block. I've taught at major universities and small colleges. When I first came to California, I was a fellow at UCLA. And although I didn't have any teaching responsibilities, I saw what I saw. I could walk into a classroom at 8 in the morning, 300 students in an amphitheater. Don't think about having your professor's phone number or email address. Don't think about even talking to your professor. You never meet him. He's the guy way down at the front of the amphitheater. You talk to his graduate student assistants. UCLA is a great research university, but great research universities are not necessarily the best places to do your first couple of years. Again, I'll talk about this a little bit down the road because I had experienced my freshman year at a mega university, Michigan State, as big as UCLA, and my second year at a community college, which was very, very small. And one of the things I enjoyed at the community college was what you enjoy here, small class sizes. You're not going to be taking an intro course with 300 people. Well, you can't look around you now, but normally we would look around the classroom and there's maybe 40 students, sometimes less. It's almost like a seminar. You have my attention, you have access to me, you have my phone number and email. Yeah, that's an advantage of a small college, and a good community college at its best can be a good small college. So there are upsides to small college experience and downsides, and likewise for large schools as well. But it's not, I think, foregone conclusion that going to a major R1, highly reputed, prestigious university is always the best choice at all stages in your education. Now, you want to go to graduate school, UCLA is great. You want to be a research professor, UCLA is great. Maybe not freshman, sophomore year, not for everybody, obviously not a foregone conclusion. So here we're talking just about money. If that's an issue, obviously it is or can be a sound financial choice to do your first 2 years at a place like here. So isn't it good to put $35,000 in your pocket? Say yes. Well, how about $750,000 too? Because over a lifetime, a college graduate is projected to earn $830,000 more than they would earn with a high school diploma only. Now, this has to be taken with a large grain of salt. But let's, just for the sake of argument, see where this goes. If this is true, and one gets out of the bachelor's degree, age 22, begins to work, retires at age 65, so working 43 years, then this $830,000 averages to $19,000 more in pay per year. Now, if this happens, it's not going to all happen at once. So you're going to get more of a return as you're more mature in your career. You're going to get less of a return up front. But it's only going to take about a year and a half of this to pay off that $30,000 average student debt. So that's an advantage in itself. Now, of course, as you're getting started, you're going to be young. You're not going to be getting all $19,000 a year. Maybe you'll be starting a family, other expenses, lots of things in it. But still, basically, the tuition that you pay will amortize itself, and you'll get back more than you put out. Now, again, beware, because like any model, this makes some assumptions, and we have in our culture a saying, never assume lest what? You've heard that saying, never assume lest you make an ass of you and me. But that's kind of fatuous advice. We cannot not assume or make what-if assumptions throughout all of life. We just have to do that. So you can have good assumptions or bad assumptions, but you can at least take your assumptions with a large grain of salt and see. But this model assumes that average earnings for a bachelor's compared to low-wage earnings for a high school diploma. It's possible in some occupations, plumbers are a good example, to earn a boatload of money and maybe do better than some people with college degrees. It also assumes that this is based on obviously our experience in the future. In the past is past going to be a good predictor of the future? Well, that's always an iffy question, and particularly given the way in which the economy has been going in recent decades, iffier still. What does Yogi Berra say? It's tough to make predictions, especially about the future. Yes, it is. But we don't need a philosopher like Yogi. We could go to a more serious philosopher, David Hume. We'll talk about this down the line in this course. Hume's problem of induction. If knowledge is based on experience, then to say the future must resemble the past is simply circular reasoning. We don't know. If anybody tells you, says Hume, that you know about the past, you're entitled to know about the future. Get my time straight. That you know about the future, you really have knowledge of the future, you're entitled to say, liar, liar, pants on fire. Nobody does. But purely for the sake of argument, okay, the $29,400, $30,000 average student debt, or the $81,000 total on the model of going 2 years community college, 2 years UC, may easily be offset by the $830,000 earned over the course of a lifetime. Problem is, in the future, which is going to be your future, I don't have much of a future. Probably got 20 years more, maybe a quarter of a century left on this planet if I'm lucky. You guys hopefully have some more time. Employment as such may be harder to come by. Full-time employment may be harder to come by. Lifelong employment may be harder to come by. And student debt, again, is not the only additional cost after graduation. So bear that in mind. However, there's a recent study that suggests that at least for the time being, this trend is still holding. You can read the details. I won't read them to you here. But I want to say something in general that needs to be said, particularly these days when even academics tend to talk about getting an education in terms of ROI, return on investment. Because I think it's true now, and it always has been, that money is not the sole point of higher education. The relationship between these two has always been unclear. Here's a book published in 1971. That was my freshman year in university. Education and Jobs, subtitled The Great Training Robbery. And I heard when I was in high school, my father wanted me to become an accountant, to be a philosophy major. Oh my goodness, no. Go to law school or do something, pre-med, something that's going to get you some money. The relationship there seemed clear to a lot of people. It's always, in fact, been unclear. Today, it's not what we've come to expect in the past. We had a reasonable expectation in the past that at least higher education was going to be the gateway to white-collar occupations and a middle-class career. That's not happening. We've got a large category of people in our society called the working poor. Think about that phrase, the working poor. A lot of people assume, well, if you're poor, it's because you don't have a job, you're too lazy to get a job, and look at the paper there, one has, blah, blah, blah. No, there are people who are working full-time, working several jobs, more than full-time, still cannot put food on the table. And for college graduates, it's not always a pretty picture. Among recent college graduates, 1 in 2 are jobless or unemployed. You can have a job, but you can be overqualified, that is, you could be in a job that's not using your training and degree. Starting salaries have declined. Student loan debt is the highest ever. And by the way, this is not a new thing. Does your mother still have student loan debt? This has been going on for quite a long time. Here's a lady, she's a teacher, biology teacher. She's going to be paying off her student loans until she's 87 years old. Doesn't look like she's close to that now, but 87 years old and still in debt. And there are a lot of millennials now who are coming to realize, I'm not going to be able to start a family. I'm not going to be able to buy a house. I'm going to be sharing a flat with roommates, an apartment, until I'm, old and gray. This is a very changed world. Money is not the sole point of higher education, and yet at the same time, I'm here to tell you, money isn't everything, but poverty sucks. I'm sorry, the Pope is just wrong when he says that poverty is virtuous, poverty is noble. St. Francis of Assisi is wrong also. Poverty, and I speak from some experience here. I'm not a rich man now, but I've become comfortable, not so much through my own efforts, but I've been very, very lucky. However, I was very poor for some time. How poor was he? When I first started university, my father had just retired from the Army. My family's finances were at its lowest point ever. And I was so poor, I would get to college a week before classes opened so I could check the textbook out of the library. And textbooks were not as expensive then as they are now. I'll show you an example. Down the road, my logic textbook from sophomore year, $5, $4.95. I remember balking at paying $30 for a new copy of the psychology textbook. Ooh, well, things have changed. Okay, so if you can possibly get out of poverty, yes, do so. If education helps you to do it, that's a good thing. Now, money's not the sole point of higher education, but if it can help you not live an uncomfortable life in poverty, good. But assuming that it doesn't, assuming that greater awareness is all that tuition money buys, if it just makes you more aware, well, that's not something to sneeze at either. I'll cite Kingman Brewster, the former president of Yale, on this. Perhaps he says, the most fundamental value of a liberal education is that it makes life more interesting. It allows you to think things which do not occur to the less learned. It makes it less likely you will be bored with life. Nonetheless, based on past experience, higher education has been a good personal investment, and community college tuition has been also a good personal investment. Whether or not the past will resemble the future again is iffy, but bear this information in mind. It certainly does have bearing. Okay. Still, whatever happens in the future, right now, would it be nice if costs could be reduced even further? Says the philosophy textbook. Give me all your money. I can't. The other textbook already took it. Average cost of books for a community college student living at home, $1,700. Now let's assume that you're taking 10 courses a year. That's $171 per course average for books. That is insane. That is obscene. I have a lot of books. My wife may complain about this. We don't live in a house, we live in a library. Every single room of my house has at least one bookcase. And when you come into my house, the vestibule is floor to ceiling books. I know because I built the bookshelves. And we have a 10-foot ceiling. So, and that's a lot of books. I have to say, I have never paid $100 or more for a book. My guilty pleasure is Amazon. I sometimes get books my colleagues wrote for a penny. Don't tell them. But I buy a lot of used books. I wouldn't even buy a coffee table book for $100. And yet I teach a course in which the full price for the textbook, well, not this course, but another course, recently was about $160. No book is worth $160 unless it's a museum piece. So here's the solution that I have hit upon by way of reducing this kind of obscene cost. We're using the classic text, again, as I said, it's primary sources. We have a special edition that's available at College Bookstore. $30 basically new price, $22 used, and it's been in use now for probably 5-6 years now. So there are some used copies around. And it's in my reserve list, on the reserve room at the first floor of the library. If you haven't used a reserve room, you go to the front desk, you ask for Professor Kavanaugh's philosophy book, put your ID card down, you can have the book for 2 hours. You're not supposed to take it out of the library, but you can Xerox it, or if you have a scanner, you can scan it. If necessary, you can read it there, whatever you need to do. It's available to you, and be creative. Now this special edition, though, is only available through our bookstore. It's not available on Amazon, even though it has an ISBN. Beware of trying to get a special edition, because you might get a special edition from another school, not the same sorts of readings. But basically, the full retail price of the current edition is $70. So $30, I think, is a substantial reduction. And I told you about my logic textbook in 1972 when I was a sophomore at Florida Keys Community College. I pulled this out recently, looked in the front, $4.95. Now, if we translated that into 2018 dollars, that's about the same price as your book from the bookstore. Now, in addition to that, I based that special edition not on the latest edition of the full text, but on the second edition, which, of course, being not the latest edition, has gone down in price. So guess what? if you want to get the full custom, or the full edition, not the custom edition, you can get this online for as little as $2 at places like Amazon and other sites. There's the ISBN for it if you want. Make sure, though, that you do use the second edition. I chose that because I like the translation of one of the texts in that one better than the third edition. But this is actually a good investment. You know, a lot of textbooks are crap. Some of them are worth keeping. Some of them I kept when I was a student. Some of them I wish I'd kept. But this would be a good one because this contains a lot of primary source documents. And not only is it a good thing to read in its own right, but it may turn out to be useful for subsequent classes. For example, there's a work by John Locke, an essay on human understanding. John Locke is also very important in the American political tradition. You may be taking a poli-sci course down the road and want to consult John Locke's writings. Well, if you have the $1.99 second edition of Poemen's Classics of Philosophy, you've got it there in your library already. So I'm still working on this, and the entire faculty at our school and other schools also is up in arms about the absurd cost of textbooks. There's something called OER, and I've not yet quite figured out how to use that. I know a lot of my colleagues are, but we're trying to get textbooks to be under $50 at least, or free at best, and I'm still working. But I've made an effort at least to get the prices down, and again, the text is available on my reserve list at the library for zero cost. Okay, let's shift gears now. We've been talking about money. Let's ask another sort of question. Why should anyone bother with philosophy? Here's the most interesting man in the world. I don't always talk to philosophy majors, but when I do, I make sure to ask them for extra pickles on my burger. Marco Rubio, presidential candidate in the last go-around, famously, welders make more money than philosophers. We need more welders, less philosophers. Where a philosophy degree gets you in real life. The red suggests nowhere, the green suggests also nowhere. Well, it's like Mark Twain said, it ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble, it's what you know for sure that just ain't so. And this is one of those things. This blew me away when I first started. It makes sense when you think about it, but it's not common knowledge. I'll just read this. The philosophers have some of the highest scores at admissions tests for management school, and philosophers have the highest scores at admissions tests for law school. And this is the killer. Philosophers have the highest acceptance rates at medical school. Why? Well, we're not talking about somebody that's just taken a course or two in philosophy, but someone who has majored in philosophy, taken consistently, and this also means taking a number of courses in logic. A person with a philosophy degree can reason their way out of a paper bag. So why would medical schools want people without pre-med biology backgrounds? Because they want people who can think on their feet. You can swat up the biology. You know, I was having dinner last summer in Paris with a guy who teaches at Harvard Medical School, and he's on the admissions committee. And he was worried because we were talking about his daughter was going up to Cambridge, and I said, well, you know, I quoted this, and he says, you know what? That makes a lot of sense, you know, because I see all these pre-med majors, bio majors coming through Harvard Law School admissions, and they're just not impressive, you know. They've got some biology down, but they can't think, you know. So there's a, you know, makes a certain sense once you discover this. Bertrand Russell, I just refer you to that if you want to see the hypertext link. The values of education and philosophy are really quite widespread. So, and sometimes the money is not bad either. So welders make more money than philosophers. We need more welders, less philosophers. How about a few English majors? It's one of those things that you know that just ain't true. Okay. And the last thing I want to say before I begin to talk about philosophy as such is this. I want you to take out your notepads. Everybody has a notepad, right? If I asked you what color is your parachute, could you tell me? Some people couldn't because they don't know they need a parachute, but everybody needs a notepad and a pen. So take your pen and do this. Draw a line down the middle of the first page of your note paper. Turn to your second page. Take a pen. Draw a line down the middle of your note paper. You know where this is going. Okay. what I've just shown you is something that I wish someone had shown me when I was a community college student. What I've shown you is the Harvard Law School note-taking method. If you go to Harvard Law School, first thing you learn day one is how to take notes. And how you take notes is you draw a line down your paper and you take notes only on the left-hand side. Leave the right-hand side blank. Why would you do that? Well, a number of reasons. One of them is, professors tend to talk quickly. I do, I know, and I've worked with students for a while. They try to get me to slow down. It's not, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. I'm sorry. I just go quickly. But, even if your teacher is not going all that quickly, you'll be caught up in the thought and you'll miss the next thing. So if you leave some space, you can go in and fill some stuff in later. Share notes with your colleagues because probably they're having the same problem. Maybe you heard something they didn't hear. And of course, now, one of the things I have some misgivings about online instruction, but one of the things I like about Zoom is that, and of course you're watching this on YouTube, so it's available to you after the fact. So you can go back. Also with my students, actual students, enrolled students, when we finish these PowerPoints, I will put those PowerPoints into PDF format and send them to you as handouts. So you can take the PDF and you can say, okay, here's something I missed. Also, I'll say from time to time, don't get all this stuff in your notes. Just put a couple, headlines in here and leave some space. You can come back and you can embellish later. So there are a number of reasons why you might want to do this. I think this is a smart idea, and there are other note-taking methods. In fact, I have and I'll direct you to this later, I have a more elaborate video also on YouTube about how to take notes. But there are some other methods, the Cornell method. But this seems to be just basic, good common sense. And I only learned about this when I was a teacher, team teaching with someone who used this method, and she taught me. But I wish I'd had this when I was a freshman. So here you go. So you see, I told you guys are already smart. You're getting a Harvard education and you're only paying Cougar tuition. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, you're paying no tuition. So how good is that? Okay, now let's turn to philosophy. And typically what I do is I ask students, of course we can't have feedback here, you've taken a course in philosophy, you've probably never taken a course in philosophy before. What do you think you're getting into? And so, I listed a list of things that people commonly think about when they think about philosophy. Philosophy is a word, it's in common vernacular. People have different ideas about this, and there are a variety of those. For example, my friend Joe Camel used to have on his matchbook covers Joe's smooth philosophy. Joe's opinion about this, that, and the other. Here's Joe's philosophy on in-laws. The only difference between in-laws and outlaws is that outlaws are wanted. Come on, guys, we got to have jokes. It's going to be a dull semester if we don't have jokes. People think they have a philosophy about this, that, or the other, where they happen to think it's my philosophy of whatnot. See's Candies has a philosophy. My wife is a native Angelina, literally, and I could get her toy ship chocolate flown in from Zurich twice a month, but no. For Valentine's Day, it always has to be See's Candy. Okay, well, See's Candy. What is our philosophy? Quality. Make the best product possible. So a commercial firm, a candy company, claims to have a philosophy. If you know the Dilbert cartoons, it's a Dilbert world. Not here at college, but I told you, I think I worked for LA Unified for a long time. That's a real Dilbert world. If you don't know the conceit, Dilbert and his fellow engineers always run circles around the pointy-haired guy. The pointy-haired guy there is their boss, who's an idiot. The engineers, they got him a laptop, but he locked up on him, so he wanted them to show him how to reboot it, and they go, tell him it's an Etch-a-Sketch, right? It's kind of clueless. So Dilbert says to his boss, my tests prove our product is defective. Customers expect delivery tomorrow. To which the boss replies, our corporate philosophy is quality is our primary goal. So Dilbert draws a logical conclusion. You want me to delay shipment until we fix the problems? No, I want you to ship now so we can book the revenue. Dilbert, that's the opposite of our philosophy. And the boss replies, well, now you know why there aren't any rich philosophers. And Dilbert's dog, Dogbert, says, there used to be one, but he believes I was a Swiss bank. Hugh Hefner Boy, Energizer Bunny had nothing on this guy. It's a Playboy philosophy. Repression twists the nature of sexuality. What causes all the sickness, the perversion, the rape is a repressive society, a society that can't be open and loving in a positive way. So, the Playboy philosophy, get your freak on. Yes, and people have all kinds of ideas about philosophy. Here's one. Let's see. This is Dateline Los Angeles, 1999. Reiner turns up heat on Zacharias over Belmont. Reiner is how many district attorneys ago, and Zacharias is how many school superintendents ago. Notice, by the way, Los Angeles still has the Belmont Learning Complex. Dateline Los Angeles, former Los Angeles County District Attorney Ira Reiner on Friday stepped up his criticism of Los Angeles School Superintendent Ruben Zacharias, who he said is, quote, engaging in, quote, philosophical musings, unquote, on the Belmont Learning Complex when he should be hammering out alternatives. Those who can do, those who can't teach. Okay, so in the vernacular, there are lots of ideas, general ideas about what philosophy is. So you could have a philosophy, who has a philosophy, and all that kind of stuff. I want to suggest to you a definition of philosophy, which is both complex and narrow, certainly narrower than most of the vernacular ideas. And this is something you will want to get on your notes. For our purposes, philosophy is going to mean two distinct but related things. And I just designate these as P1 and P2. And that's not in widespread use. It's simply my shorthand. If you went to one of my philosophy teaching colleagues and said, what do you think about P1 and P2? They would look at you with incomprehension. But if you explained the ideas, everybody would understand what you're talking about. So I'm just going to use the shorthand. By P1, I'm going to refer to the Western tradition of rational inquiry as such. And you want to get this definition in your notes. That's P1. And by P2, I'm going to refer to the specialized discipline in modern academic life, which treats those three problems I mentioned with respect to the syllabus: metaphysics, ethics, and epistemology. And again, I'm not going to define these right now. I will shortly. So P1 and P2. Now, let's look at this definition. It is complex. It has two parts. It's not a simple definition. Maybe it would be easier if I could tell you philosophy is X in one sentence, but I'm reminded of what Einstein said. It's important to make things as simple as possible, but just no simpler. And that would be to make it too simple. So there are reasons why we need to have this complexity in defining philosophy. Secondly, although there are broad definitions of philosophy, these two are both narrower than wonder or love of wisdom or, my point of view or what have you. And of the two, thirdly, P2 is the narrower of the two. P1 and P2 are both narrow, but P2 is narrower still. Okay, let's look at these in order. Let's start with P1. The Western tradition of rational inquiry as such. Philosophy in this first sense, P1, begins in a particular region and cultural area and a particular time. That is, it begins in Greece, specifically in a bit of Greece called Ionia. We'll come to the map in just a minute, where it is known as Ionian nature philosophy. And that's an interesting phrase because it's an anachronism. Initially, philosophy was thought of as nature philosophy. Nowadays, you won't find nature philosophy. People who do philosophy do something other than the study of nature. People who study nature do something other than philosophy. They do one of the sciences. So first of all, philosophy begins in Greece, and secondly, it begins around the 6th century BC or BCE. Here's a map of Greece, larger Greece, the Hellenic heartland. You can see I've circled in white Athens, which is on the mainland of Greece and is today even the capital of the nation of Greece. Delphi, we'll talk about that. Delos in green, Delphi is in yellow, Delos is in green. Miletus, we'll come to that, in Asia Minor, and Troy, in Ionia, actually circled in blue. It's around where Troy would be. Now, the nation of Greece is the Greek mainland plus the Cyclades Islands plus Crete and a few other islands. The area where we see Ionia and Miletus, that's not Greece today. That's the nation of Turkey. And of course, the Turks and the Greeks in modern history not been terribly friendly, but Greece was in that day, wherever the Greeks settled, and they settled, as we'll see, throughout the Mediterranean, including what we now call Italy. They called it Magna Graecia, the boot bit of Italy. and also as far away as, let's say, well, Spain and particularly Marsilia. Um, the whole viticultural enterprise in the Mediterranean area comes about because the Greeks cultivated grapes there so many centuries ago, and it's continued today. But this is the Hellenic heartland, and it's that bit called Ionia there, circled in blue, and particularly the town of Miletus, circled in red, where the whole story starts. It's a little confusing because there's more than one Ionia in Greece, but this is the one that we're concerned with. Now, not only did P1 originate in a particular region in Greece, it also originated at a particular time, 6 centuries basically BCE. How long ago was this? Well, think about time as a negative, positive and negative timeline, right? BC or BCE, back before the birth of Christ, CE or AD, since the birth of Christ. So we're about 2,000 years or so since the beginning point, and they were about 600 years before. So about 2,600 years. By the way, BC, AD, etc. BC stands, of course, for before Christ. AD stands not, as some people would say, for after death, but stands for Anno Domini. It's in relation to the birth of Christ. It's not as if, supposedly Jesus lived 30 years, and it's not as if there's just a 30-year gap. The year 0 is followed by the year 1 of the Common Era, or AD, and preceded by the year 1 before the Common Era. There's really no 0 year in either case. It's just a break point. And even though this is a religious way of reckoning time, most ways of reckoning time in most cultures are religious. It really doesn't matter. It's all, it's an arbitrary decision. So we use the secular terms before the Common Era and the Common Era just as easily as we use the religious terms before Christ and Anno Domini, but they mean exactly the same thing. So you can use them interchangeably. It doesn't really matter. Now, so about 2,600 years then since philosophy has been around. Okay, pay attention to what I've said, but pay attention also to what I didn't say. What I said was this, 2 things. P1 originates in Greece, and P1 originates about the 6th century BCE. Here's what I have not said, not, underline that. What I have not said is that thinking starts with the Greeks, nor have I said that thinking starts 2,600 years ago. In other words, philosophy is not as broad as thinking as such. It's really quite narrow. Thinking as such is an anthropological universal, far older than the 2,500, 2,600 years that philosophy has been around. How do we know this? As far as we can detect our species, Homo sapiens, we find creatures who buried their dead. Now, why is this important? Well, because we're the only species that does this, okay? I had a couple packs of dogs. Actually, I had to separate them. I had the big dogs, Dalmatians, and a big old chow. And then I have some little dachshunds. And dachshunds are small dogs, but they are fierce, and they would fight. So I had to put the dachshunds in the front of the house, and big dogs in the backyard. And, dogs form friendships. If one of the dogs would die, the others would notice. They'd sniff around the body, and they would be upset and whimper. But they wouldn't bury their friend, even though they're great at digging holes under the fence, but they wouldn't dig a grave and bury the body. We do that with our dead. One of the earliest sites has weapons, tools, flower pollen. Do you ever carry flowers out to your grandmother's grave? You should. Well, you're only doing what our species has been doing as far as we can tell from the very beginning. Tools, weapons, food. In a very poor society, these things are hard to come by. Why would you possibly sacrifice useful items and edible items unless you had the idea that this isn't the end for them, that there's an afterlife and you need to provide for your loved ones in the afterlife. As early as these very primitive cave-dwelling early Homo sapiens, they had some very complex ideas. It wasn't just alley-oop, hitting the woman over the head and dragging her back to the cave by the hair. Now, these were people that had some complex thoughts. What happens to us after death? What's our place in the universe? They're thinking some very abstract thoughts. The other kind of example, it's a little newer, but it still comes from very, very primitive societies, is cave paintings. Lascaux, for example, in the south of France. And we used to think that the animals that were painted in the Lascaux caves were some kind of hunting magic. But we know what kinds of animals these folks hunted and ate, and some of the animals they painted are their food, but some of them are animals they didn't eat. These guys were doing what we would now call art for art's sake. They had some very complex thoughts. And so, again, they were thinking beings. Wherever we find our species, Homo sapiens sapiens, and that's been quite around for quite a long time, we find thinking, abstract thinking. But that's not the same as philosophy. Philosophy is a little more specialized than that. Philosophy is neither as widespread nor as broadly defined as thinking. If you think about it in terms of the Euler diagram I've drawn here, philosophy is a subset of thinking. Yes, philosophers do think, but not everyone who thinks is a philosopher. Not every body of thought is philosophy. So it's possible to define philosophy in broad terms. Our definitions, though, both P1 and P2, somewhat narrower, and the second, which we haven't come to yet, is even narrower than the first. There are some very definite reasons for that. Okay, so this kind of summarizes what I've said. To put it in perspective, how old is old? Well, we now know the universe is about 14 billion years old. The university, on the other hand, only about 900, not quite a millennium. Philosophy, the oldest discipline, about 2,600 years. Sociology, the newest discipline, a little more than 100 years old. So yeah, 2,600 years seems long compared to our own lifespans, but not that long compared to how long we've been around, either as a species or as a planet. Okay, Ionian nature philosophy. We can date, I said 6th century BCE, we can actually date it to a precise year, one or two precise years. Either 585 or possibly 582 BCE. In fact, we could even give it a precise date. On the 28th of May, 585 BCE, something happened, and something was said about what happened that was unique for the first time in human history. What is that? Here's what it is. Remember I talked about Miletus, the town in Ionia? Well, there was a character there by the name of Thales. Thales, they would say in Greece. We say Thales in English, lived in Miletus, predicted an eclipse for the 28th of May, 585 BCE. Okay, now what's an eclipse? Well, there are two kinds actually. There are solar eclipses and lunar eclipses. A solar eclipse, and that's the kind Thales was predicting, occurs, as we know, because the Earth goes around the sun and the moon goes around the Earth. And periodically, during daylight hours on the side of the Earth that gets the sunlight, the moon will interpose itself between the sun and the Earth and cast a shadow, actually shadows, two kinds of shadows. It'll cast a cone, complete darkness, on a small section of the Earth, and then it'll cast a penumbra of a larger scope, but also not so dark, on a wider area. And this happens on average of about once a year. Now, we don't always see it because, again, most of the Earth is water. So a lot of it happens over, not over land masses, but over bodies of water. So maybe one ship at sea will see the eclipse, but it won't be seen by large numbers of people. I had the privilege to see the last eclipse of the last millennium, 1999. My wife and I went to France. It doesn't take much to get me to France, actually. Well, you can't see it here, but my watch is always on Paris time. And that's just because in case I, for some reason, find myself suddenly in Paris, well, I don't have to change my watch. It's so very convenient. And 1999, of course, we knew there was going to be an eclipse, so we went there. And it's a sight to be seen. We went traveling along with my wife's ex-husband and his new wife. By the way, that's not as weird as it sounds. You know, if you have to have a divorce, it might as well be amicable, particularly if you have children involved, as they did. But we're friends, and we socialize a lot, and even travel together sometimes. And they stayed in Paris. They didn't want to come down to the coast with us. We were going to drive down. We took a car, going to drive to the coast. But as it turned out, the roads were so crowded, everybody wanted to see the eclipse. So we had to stop about halfway on the banks of the Seine. So we pulled up and got some cider, which is what they drink in Normandy, and opened the cider and sat on the banks. It was about noontime. And what happened was spectacular. You know what a rheostat is? One of those switches that you use to dim the lights. Well, it's as if there were a rheostat attached to the sun. It's bright sunlight, and all of a sudden, over the course of about 2 minutes, the sun gets dialed down to nothing. And it's complete total pitch black for about another 2 minutes. And then for about 2 minutes still, it gets dialed up again. The birds are going crazy. Now, even if you know what's going to happen, it's a sight to see. And I certainly recommend it if you're able to do that. Now, we understood, and we could predict because Thales had shown us how to do this. We understood that this kind of thing that you see right here is exactly what's happening. Thales didn't have that idea. He was basically an empiricist who worked out a few calculations based on regularities of eclipses that had happened before. He gathered, timing and so forth, and then was able to extrapolate that timing. He had no idea that the Earth went around the sun. Nobody did in those days. That's okay, though. He didn't need to know that in order to make the prediction. We now know so much more about it. We understand it, much, much better than he did. But he had enough information to do it. Now, why was this important? Here's why. Because for a lot of people in his day, and even some people in our own day, eclipses are scary. Here is a headline from the eclipse, the major eclipse before the one that I saw. This was in 1996. And 95, sorry. And by the way, it went over about the same area from Land's End in England across the Channel through France, including Paris, went on through Germany, Iran, India, etc. Dateline New Delhi. It was only 8:15 a.m., but the sun was darkening, the sky was darkening, and the birds were winging back to their nests. Elderly Hindu priest Sulal hurried to light the sacred fire. Quote, "The sun is suffering and being troubled by demons," unquote, explained the barefoot Pandit. But we are doing this to soothe its soul. Well, for a lot of people, they see the sun go dark and they get worried. Is it going to come back? So what do? Well, like the Hindu priest lighting the fire, you find the priest, you pay him some money, he does his fire lighting or magical dance or whatever the case may be, brings rain sometimes, and brings the sun back, and it works. Wow. And he pockets fee. Well, I guess better to do that than what some of our priests do. It's an old profession. By the way, what is the oldest profession in the world? Anybody know? Usually at this point somebody says prostitution. No, that's actually the second oldest profession. The priesthood is the oldest profession. These guys have had quite a racket going. Now, why was this important? Well, it's important for the following reason. Even if you don't understand, how the mechanics work and the sun going, the Earth going around the sun, if you can predict an eclipse, if an eclipse can be on schedule, then no matter what else you do or do not know, one thing you do know is that whatever is causing this eclipse, it's not the activities of the gods. It's not the devils and the demons and the gods and so forth fighting. Why? Because gods don't follow schedules, okay? One of the things it means to be a god is that I don't have to follow anybody else's rules but my own. So let's say I'm Zeus and I have my thunderbolts and I don't like you. And so I take my thunderbolt and boom, you're gone. But you say that's unfair. You know what? If I'm Zeus, I don't have to listen to that. I don't have to follow your rules or sense of fair play or anything else outside my own whims. To be a god is to follow your whims. Think about babies, Babies are born in this world, 15 pounds of squalling protoplasm. I'm just checking to see if the ladies are listening. 15 pounds? They're just a bundle of wants. Want. They're just all whim, and they're not human yet. You can't take them to lunch, right? They're just, they want to urinate, defecate, whatever. And what happens over time is they have to learn, no, can't do this. There are times and places to eat, yes, but you can't have the nini every time you start crying. And there are times and places to urinate and defecate, but not everywhere. Not in your clothes, not, whenever. And then eventually they catch on. They become scheduled. They become rule-bound. They cease to be the little gods that they were when they were born and completely women. And then you could take them out to lunch, Of course, then when they're 30, they move back in, but that's another matter. Yeah. Thales realized that whatever else is going on with the eclipse, it's not the whim of the gods, it's something else. And so Thales and his colleagues came up with a concept and a new word for that concept. In their language, physis, we would transliterate it in our letters as physis. What what does that word look like a word we have in English? Of course, it looks like physics. It's the word for nature. And before Thales predicted the eclipse, not only did we not have this word, we did not have this, most important, we did not have this concept. Nature is a realm of activity that you can analyze and understand with human reason. It follows its own regularity. It may even be mathematically predictable, but it's whatever else it is. You don't have to refer to the gods and the demons. Nature, capital N. You probably want to get this in your notes. P-H-Y-S-I-S, physis, that's how we'd spell it. Don't have to do the Greek spelling. Nature. And what's the alternative to nature? Well, the alternative to nature is animism. From the Latin word anima, soul, spirit. The view that God, spirits, demons, etc., dwell everywhere and in everything. That's the view that Thales overcame, really speaking, begun to overcome. For an animist, the world is full of persons, only some of whom are human. And for us, we're post-animists, we think of persons only in terms of human beings. What is a person? A person is someone to whom moral obligation is owed. Okay, I owe you moral obligation as your fellow human being, and you owe me. The whole notion of human rights. But if you're an animist, it goes so much further. Let's say, for example, I want to build a house. So what do? I go get some lumber. If I can't buy it at the lumber yard because somebody's already cut it, I go get a tree, cut the tree down, move the tree, etc. Okay, and no problem, because the tree is nature. It's not a person who I have to respect. It doesn't have rights like humans have rights. It's a resource. Well, but you see, for an animist, that's not so. The tree is a moral being. If you're going to cut that tree down, at the very least, what you have to do is you have to pray to the spirit of that tree and say, sorry, tree, I know this is going to damage you, but I need your lumber, so I'm going to do this. And then all may be forgiven. The angry spirit of the tree will not come to haunt you and all that kind of possible stuff. Well, let's say I want to go hunting a deer. What do I do now? Well, I get a deer tag, and I get either a rifle, or in some places, Georgia, they use a shotgun. Some people use bows, whatever. I find a place that has deer. I get permission to use the land if it's not my own land, and I go shoot the deer, tag him, and he's meat. But if you're an animist, see, that deer is a person. You have to pray to the spirit of that deer. Oh, please, deer, I'm sorry I have to do this. I know you have a family, and so do I, but I got to eat. It's either you or it's me. It's you. Okay. If you've seen the film Avatar, James Cameron's imaginary planet with the blue people, they're animists. They can communicate with the souls of the trees and the animals, and that's that kind of mindset. But that's the kind of mindset that we've lost. Not even our most religious people are animists. People may say, well, God is the God of nature and created nature. Yeah, but they still operate with the concept of nature. They don't say the tree is sacred, the river is sacred, the mountain is sacred. But people did at one point. That's what you have to realize. Rivers were persons. The river Seine was inhabited by the goddess Sequana. The river Thames, inhabited by Father Thames. When you hear thunder, it's God bowling, or the devil beating his wife. When it rains, it may be the gods pissing on you. All kinds of stuff like that. So under animism, gods and spirits control events. Under the notion of nature, though, natural events can be understood in their own terms without having to refer to the whims of the gods or the demons or the spirits. 3 revolutions in human thought, according to Sigmund Freud. There was the revolution, the Copernican revolution. Copernicus, Galileo, and others showed us that indeed that model that we just saw, the heliocentric model, Earth goes around the sun rather than everything going around the Earth. Big, big change in our frame of reference. Charles Darwin. Humans, we used to think we were special, but we're one more form of animal, a very adept form of animal, but continuous. And Freud himself, he thought he had a 3rd revolution, the unconscious. But there was an earlier revolution comparable in scope, and that isn't what we're talking about now. Ionian nature philosophy, major intellectual revolution along the lines of Darwinism, along the lines of Copernicanism, along the lines of Freudianism even, if we're going to count Freud in there. The concept of nature broke drastically with all prior animistic ways of thinking, and this is specifically the origin of science. The German sociologist Max Weber, coming to the centenary of his death. I'm speaking to you in May 2020. He died in June 1920. Famously stated a condition for scientific reasoning that there can be no magic, no animism. There are no, as he put it, mysterious, incalculable forces that come into play, but rather one can, in principle, master all things by calculation. He gave this a famous name, the disenchantment of the world. Edith Hamilton, who was a classical scholar, noted of Greece in particular, that long before Thales even came along, even religion in Greece was inclined to be unmagical, even back to Homer. So what Thales did, was not perhaps such an entire break, but it was nevertheless an innovation and one that's had far-reaching consequences ever since. So the Ionians did that. Secondly, and independently of turning us to the study of nature, they gave us a new method, sometimes called comprehensively critical rationalism, CCR for short, the habit of analysis. And this is certainly part of science, but it's not specific to science. It's part of educated human thinking ever since. Now, there are a number of important consequences that follow from defining philosophy in the manner we're beginning to define it. Here's a key point. Because of CCR, comprehensively critical rationalism, and its origins in P1, here are some things philosophy is not. It is not just any body of human thought. It is not the generic love of wisdom. It is not something found universally in every culture. It's not any in every dormitory bull session. Here's a meme with philosophy majors after 6 Miller Lights. I'm not sure if this is what actual philosophy majors look like after they've foolishly indulged in 6 Miller Lights. You can get better beer than that. Or whether this is the average dorm rat and he becomes a philosophy major after 6 Miller Lights. I'm not sure. Philosophy is rather a highly specific tradition. Therefore, in order to know the history of philosophy, one has to, in order to practice the craft of philosophy, one has to know the history of philosophy. This is not true of every academic discipline. Alfred North Whitehead famously said that science which hesitates to forget its founders is lost. This is not true of science, but you can't just make philosophy up on the fly, on the blue, deductively, analytically out of your head. It's important to know the tradition of philosophy, to know what things people have said before, what things have worked, and the larger number of things, what things have not worked. Therefore, philosophy isn't just a wisdom tradition. It's not finding the special guy, the guru at the top of the mountain who can tell you the answer to everything. Nor is philosophy a system of indoctrination or thought control. Christopher Hitchens, I think, puts this point rather nicely. Let's listen to him. We can. There we go.
Further to the principles of free inquiry and open debate that go up to make a great university, my view is, and will always be, that it matters not what you think. Anyone can have thoughts. Many people content themselves with feelings. It matters how you think.
Matters not what you think, it matters how you think. Philosophy has no orthodoxy. Well, the word orthodoxy does come from the Greek orthos, correct, and doxy meaning belief. Christianity makes a big deal of this, but as Edith Hamilton points out, the word or the concept of orthodoxy, neither of these is found in ancient Greek, not even in ancient Greek religion, much less in the philosophy that comes out of Greece. First law of philosophy: for every philosopher, there exists an equal and opposite philosopher. Yes. Nor can philosophy be defined simply as unbridled, unfocused skepticism. Gullibility comes in several flavors. One of them is to believe everything you think. If you believe everything you think, you're gullible. But there is, as Cynthia Ozick has said, also another kind of gullibility, the gullibility which disbelieves everything. If you've spent any time at all on the internet, you know what I'm talking about, all the conspiracy theories. Well, that's what they want you to think. Well, of course, the deep state and the Illuminati wants you to think that 5G isn't a certain. Okay, well, we've all heard this stuff. Philosophy employs skepticism, but it employs skepticism in some focused, organized ways. It's not just blanket skepticism. CCR has persisted from the time of Thales, comprehensively critical rationalism. It persists in the insistence that we reason critically. It's the main cultural foundation for studying logic. Now let's look at nature philosophy. This is, again, what the Ionians founded, the beginnings of philosophy, but philosophy is not going to stay there. In particular, we'll see the nature philosophers talked about two kinds of things that are still with us today. They searched for elements, that is to say, elemental substances which you cannot break down any further than that, makes them elements. And they typically propose things like earth, air, fire, and water. You may have heard of that. Also, the notion of the atom, which we'll come back to presently. Now, Thales and the other Ionian nature philosophers operated in a span about 200 years or so before Socrates. And by the way, here's a good source. This is not an assignment, but I remember, again, when I was a student, it was not that long ago. My teachers would always say things like, if you want to follow up, here's a really good source. And I would always write these things down. And if I found the book in a bookstore, I'd buy it. And some of them I've read, and a few of them I still have yet to get to. But hey, I'm an old guy and I got nothing to do for the rest of my life but read and study. So I'll get to them eventually. A lot of other things too. Anyway, this is one of them. It's before and after Socrates. It tells you the story about how we got from the Ionian nature philosophers to Socrates, and particularly what Socrates did, and then the fallout from Socrates. It's a real thin book. It's only about that thick, so you could read it a couple of hours, get up to speed on key aspects of ancient philosophy, at least. But again, not an assigned reading, but something that if you want to follow up, is a good source. The pre-Socratic philosophers did not arrive at a lot of the right answers, but they did manage to ask some of the right questions. And, it's like Winnie the Pooh says, having the right answer can be highly overrated, which is often true. Not in an exam situation, but often true. They were the first ones in history to ask the sorts of questions which led us, by asking about elements, which led us eventually to the periodic table, which is one of the real key pieces of understanding that's emerged from the modern era. Also, by asking about the notion of an atom, led us to a very, very basic bit of science, which integrates our physics with our chemistry and now, indeed, with our biology. They were the ones that got those balls rolling, although it took some time to work out the details, quite a long time. Philosophy since P1. The Western tradition of rational inquiry, as such, we've seen it began in Greece around the time of Thales. Now we're going to look at the other side, and I'm going to define for you those three branches: metaphysics, ethics, and epistemology. And it's the second sense, P2, that has more contemporary importance. Okay, so here's the definition. And again, if you don't have this in your notes already, you want to have it in. Three problem areas: metaphysics, ethics, and epistemology. If you are doing philosophy these days in sense P2, you are doing a problem in one or more of these areas. And if you are doing problems in areas other than these three, the academic discipline from which you're operating is something other than philosophy. I remember some years ago, I was teaching a class on logic and talking about this as kind of background. And it was a one night a week class. So the next week we came back, I did a bit of review. Can anybody tell me what the three branches of philosophy are? And somebody says metaphysics. So in those days we had chalkboards. I chalked up metaphysics, good, study of being good. And what's another one? Somebody says ethics. I'm chalked it up, ethics, good, the study of the good. And what's the third one? And Shirley Finnegan, she won't mind my telling the story. Shirley Finnegan stands up at the back and says, episiotomy. Again, I'm just checking to see if the ladies are paying attention. No, epistemology. They sound kind of similar, but no, they're very, very different. Epistemology, I understand, is much less painful. Now, today there aren't any nature philosophers. Those who study nature are scientists and not philosophers. Those who study philosophy do one or more of these three areas. And I've drawn a kind of a rough graph here that the numbers aren't exact, but if we divide the history of philosophy, as we conventionally do, into four periods: ancient philosophy, medieval, early modern, and modern, and if we set the three branches, epistemology in green, ethics in red, and metaphysics in blue, at about equal value in the ancient world, what we see is this. Metaphysics takes off, and ethics and epistemology do a bit of an eclipse for a while during the Middle Ages. Now, we'll talk about this again. I have one paper handout for you, and I'll do a separate lecture on this handout, which will also be on the YouTube channel. But it's a cliche. The Middle Ages was an age of religion. But cliches are sometimes not false. They may be hackneyed and cliched, but it certainly was a period of time in which religion, some parts of religion, embraced philosophy in a way that it hasn't been since. And one of the reasons why religion got so interested in philosophy was the metaphysics of Aristotle and the way in which this seemed to support their idea of a God governing the universe. Well, now, if you have a direct line to God, what do you need by way of ethics, independent ethics? You don't, because God's going to tell you what to do. And what do you need by way of epistemology? Because God was there at the beginning of creation, and he can tell you anything you need to know about the natural order. So it's not surprising metaphysics would take a big bump, and the other two would shrink. But it's also a cliche, the early modern era, particularly in the modern era, ages of science. So guess what? Epistemology, particularly philosophy of science, takes over. Now, ethics didn't do so well for a while, and we'll talk about this when we come to the section on ethics, there is a secular reason in fairly recent history why ethics got a bit of a bump too. But basically, if we look at the modern era, it's an era in which the theory of knowledge, philosophy of science, logic, all this kind of stuff, is, particularly in the English-speaking world, relatively more important. Metaphysics and ethics relatively less so. So this is a rough graph showing what happens over time. It's basically to summarize what I just said. Okay, now the question is, how did we get from P1 to P2 and why? Well, here's what happens. Among the pre-Socratics, the eminent nature philosophers, philosophy P1 was all the knowledge there was. If you were a knowledgeable person, you were a philosopher. And what happens over time is that knowledge grows. So other bodies of knowledge, other academic disciplines precipitate out of philosophy. Philosophy was sort of the mother discipline of them all. But astronomy becomes a body of knowledge in its own right. Psychology becomes a body of knowledge in its own right. History, physics, etc. And philosophy shrinks to become, guess what, a body of knowledge just like all the others alongside all of them. And that's the sense in which we refer to philosophy as P2. One more academic discipline among all the others, but it has those three distinct problem areas: metaphysics, ethics, and epistemology. And that just summarizes what I said here. The key word here is specialization. Today, if you're working as a philosopher, you're confining yourself to certain intellectual problems only to the exclusion of others. And if you're dealing with those other problems, you're doing something other than philosophy. Now, there are several reasons for this. One of them has to do with Socrates. And again, Cornford's book will give you a good accounting of this. Socrates deliberately decided that philosophy needs to turn away from speculation about nature in order to understand first the human animal. The proper study of mankind as man, someone later would put this, that was Socrates' idea initially. So Socrates drives a wedge, deliberately so, between the study of nature and the study of human life. Thales predicted an eclipse. He was one of the guys who talked about elements. He thought water was the primary element. We'll see that when we come to read him. Earth, air, fire, and water, naturally occurring substances. We think of those main candidates among the Greeks. Democritus sought the notion of an atom. But Socrates said, I am not interested in things up in the clouds and under the earth. And this will come out with a vengeance in his defense at his trial. Oops, I let the cat out of the bag. Yes, he was put on trial and didn't do so well. But he says, quite explicitly, if you confuse me with the pre-Socratics, you just haven't listened to what I've been saying. I've had nothing to say about these sorts of topics all my life. I want to know what the good is. I want to know how men could live in the city. And maybe if we solve our human problems, maybe someday we'll have time to get around to the nature problems. But basically, nature is not my first concern, nor should it be ours. So this drives a wedge very early on between what we now call the sciences and the humanities. Those were not terms at the time, but that's where they've become. Our tendency is to distinguish between these two. And as Bettany Hughes has said, Bettany Hughes has an interesting book on Socrates called The Hemlock Cup. Very well worth reading. She's not a professional philosopher, she's a journalist, but very learned and clever, and her stuff is worth reading. She says, Socrates, we think the way we do because Socrates thought the way he did. And here's a perfectly good example. We'll talk about this in a minute. C.P. Snow in the 20th century is worried about the gulf between these two, what he calls the two cultures, science and humanities. But the basic division between them is very long-standing. So that's one reason. One reason why we don't deal with nature philosophy anymore in philosophy is that Socrates led us down that path. But even had Socrates not existed, it seems to me there is a separate secular reason why this would have happened. And that is because knowledge grows exponentially, as in this curve. My friend Eric De Soto Price here, I'll talk about him a little more later, with his model of the Antikythera mechanism. Derek was the guy who founded scientometrics, the quantitative study of scientific knowledge. And he notes that science grows exponentially. One of the phrases he's famous for is he said sometime about 1960, 63, I think, if science continues to grow at the rate it has been growing since the Second World War, and we're talking here only 15, 20 years, if it continues to grow, by the year 2000, there will be more scientists than there are human beings. How is that possible? Are we going to recruit dogs and put white lab coats on them? How can there be more humans than there, and more scientists than there are? Well, it can't be. It's one of those limiting case conditions like Moore's law in computing, computing power doubles every 2 years. Well, as a short-term secular trend, that's interesting to note, but it can't go on forever. And likewise, the growth of science couldn't. But he also said at that point, there are more scientists alive today than there have been throughout the rest of human history, and that still is a good benchmark. And he goes on to generalize beyond science to the growth of knowledge generally. But I got two words for you here, and they ain't Merry Christmas. They are these: knowledge explosion. That's the second reason why we don't deal with questions about nature anymore if we operate as philosophers. From the time of Thales to our own time, there has been an exponential growth in just how much that humans know. And this growth has accelerated, especially in recent times. We must be long past the time, if there ever was such a time, when any single person could hope to know it all. I've got a question for you. Anybody ever heard the term Renaissance man? What is a Renaissance man? Well, when people think about this, they first perhaps think about Leonardo da Vinci, the guy who knew everything. Or before Leonardo, there was Aristotle, who was seriously thought up through the Middle Ages to be the guy who knew everything. In later times, Benjamin Jowett at Oxford. My name is Benjamin Jowett. I'm master of Balliol College. Whatever is knowledge, I know it, and what I don't know is not knowledge. Was thought to embody everything. Thurston Veblen, the American economist sociologist, was said to have been the last man who really did know everything. I don't know about that, but certainly if there ever was such a time, question, what if there ever was such a time? It is not our own time. None of us can hope to be Renaissance men or women. What we do is instead to strive for a liberal education. And a liberal education is an education that mixes breadth and depth. You don't want to get too narrowly specialized. You want to get some breadth, but at the same time, there's a limit to that breadth. I go back to Kingman Brewster again. I quoted him a little earlier. Perhaps the most fundamental value of a liberal education is that it makes life more interesting. It allows you to think things which do not occur to the less learned. It makes it less likely that you will be bored with life. Now, don't get distracted by the multiple meanings that liberal has, particularly that higher education is lefty indoctrination. There's a lot of stuff in the web about that. The liberal in liberal education doesn't refer to politics. It refers to liberality of outlook, to breadth of scope. Now, we don't have any Renaissance men nowadays. We have, hopefully, some people who are liberally educated. We have a very few of those who we could call polymaths. And here are some examples of modern polymaths, all of whom I had the pleasure to have known in my lifetime. I mentioned Derek Price. We'll come back to him in a minute. Derek's interesting. He was an historian of science. One of his books is Science Since Babylon. It's worth reading. But also, you see here, he's the guy who discovered the Antikythera mechanism, and I'll show a little video clip about that. Derek is one of these guys that sees things that are hiding in plain sight. He found this mechanism in the basement of the National Museum in Athens, and it had been there. It's a lot of archaeological and paleontological stuff. Is just guys go out and collect it during the collecting season. They put it in a drawer in the basement. It gets there, lays there forever until maybe somebody comes along and says, "Oh goodness, what's this?" And that's exactly what Derek did with this. He's also the guy who discovered what is still to this day the only known holograph of Geoffrey Chaucer. Geoffrey Chaucer, one of the first guys to write in the English vernacular, up at Peterhouse College, and Peterhouse, I think, is the oldest college up in Cambridge. Derek was just rummaging through the library, and how many people over the centuries have gone through the collections in Peterhouse? And he comes across this manuscript and realizes this is Chaucer's handwriting, and identified it as such. So he's a guy that, he's got a specialty in one area, but he also has some competence in other areas. Stephen Jay Gould. If ever you have something better to do but wish to avoid doing it, you can certainly do worse than to read any of the essays by Stephen Jay Gould. He used to write a column for Natural History magazine. These columns are collected now in various volumes. Hen's Teeth and Horses' Toes is one in one collection, the lead essay. Did you know, by the way, that that hens have teeth? Well, we have a proverb. It's as scarce as chickens' teeth, but it turns out chickens do have a gene for teeth. Now, that gene is suppressed phenotypically, but isn't it interesting? Chickens had ancestors that had teeth. Okay. Hen's teeth and horses' toes. Horses have toes. Now, it looks like a horse has a hoof, right? But if you look at the evolution of a horse, Eohippus and so forth, they were about as big as a small dog, and now they stand about 6 foot high at the shoulder. They had the same basically 5 digits truncated to 4 that dogs have, but what happened over time is as they grew in size, their digits got truncated, so that what happened was the nail of the middle digit became elongated, elaborated into the hoof, which we now see. So when you go to the track and watch the ponies, this is what they're doing. They're showing you their middle digits with their big hoofs. That's what they're running at. Okay. And, Stephen Jay Gould was a paleontologist, major evolutionary theorist, occupied a chair up at Harvard, but also very conversant in humanity. He could quote Shakespeare or the Bible as quickly as he could quote Charles Darwin. So he was, a guy who had a foot in a lot of different camps, although he had a clear specialization, as everybody must. Noam Chomsky, he's still alive. If anybody has ever heard of Noam Chomsky, they may have heard of him for his politics. He is the leading living spokesman for a political philosophy known as anarchism. Also, major critic of American foreign policy, starting with the Vietnam War. Now, he is by training a linguist, and a very major linguist. We'll see a clip on him a little later down the road, but he came up with the notion of generative grammar. Cartesian linguistics is sometimes called. Major innovation in linguistics, but also it's swatted up a lot of knowledge about area studies. So he's written on the Vietnam conflict, he's written on the Middle East conflict, he's written on the Contra conflict during the Reagan years in Central America, and various other political enterprises as well. And is highly respected for his political, or at least his political science savvy. People quarrel with his political views quite a lot. But he's a guy, who's a specialist in one area, but he's also able to branch out and say some interesting things about other disciplines. And then lastly, my friend Robert Merton, Mr. Sociology, as the New Yorker called him in 1962, but also the author of an interesting underground literary classic called On the Shoulders of Giants, which he traces, Isaac Newton famously said, if I can see further, it's because I stand on the shoulders of giants. And Robert traced this to actually a medieval monk by the name of Bernard of Clairvaux. So here you've got a guy, who's at home in the social sciences, but also at home in the humanities. And so these 4 folks are good examples of a kind of a rare beast called the polymath. But it's, I think, interesting that such beasts can even exist. Let's look at a clip about Derek Price and his Antikythera mechanism. It's interesting. If we can, oh, there it is. Okay.
In 1900, some sponge fishermen were blown off course in a storm and took shelter on Antikythera, a small island near Crete. When the storm had passed, They dived. To their surprise, they found a 2,000-year-old wreck of a cargo ship that had been carrying bronze statues. The contents of the wreck were transferred to a museum in Athens. Among them was a strange lump of bronze and decayed wood, the size of a shoebox, almost completely encrusted with limestone. This turned out to be one of the most astounding archaeological finds ever. The fragments were what was left of a mechanism that had consisted of at least 30 separate cogwheels, cut from bronze and housed in a wooden box. It was a sophisticated portable clockwork machine from the time of Archimedes. Scientists and archaeologists puzzled about what it could possibly be. From analysis of the position and number of teeth of the cogwheels, Derek Price, a British historian of science, eventually worked out that it was an astronomical device, which even had an instruction manual engraved on the side. Built around 100 BC, the Antikythera mechanism accurately predicted the relative positions of the sun, the moon, and the known planets on any chosen date, a kind of analog computer. It even signaled dates when the Olympic Games fell. Nothing quite like it has been found since. We knew the ancient Greeks were clever, but whoever designed this was some kind of genius.
Yes, Eureka, as Archimedes said, that's the motto of the state of California. Previously, we thought of clockwork as a medieval technology, but this one discovery showed us that it was much older and that technology was much more sophisticated than we had been inclined to believe before. So again, just something hiding in plain sight, just a lump of junk. Eric x-rays it and, oh my goodness, what's in here? And then off we go. Okay. This is a town in the south of France called Rocamadour. And I visited this town maybe 20 years ago. The reason I went was I had had lunch in Paris and I had an interesting dessert. It was a tart made out of honey and goat cheese from Rocamadour. I said, oh, I have to go find the place where this goat cheese comes from. And those are kind of weird flavors to put together, but it worked very well. So I went there. Now this is a strange sort of town. It's built into the side of a cliff. This is a kind of architecture called sometimes troglodyte. You see it a lot in France because France has a lot of limestone. Limestone is easy to carve. You see it in the Loire Valley, for example, not in fortifications like this, but people will carve caves basically out of the limestone and then use the blocks that they quarried to build the front of their buildings on the outside, but the building actually goes into the side of a hill or the side of a mountain. The reason the residents of Rocamadour did this in this way, this radically, was that this area was part of the territory that was contested for many decades between the English and the French. You know, we think of France as one unified country, but it took a while to get there. And for a long period of time, much of France was ruled by the King of England. And the King of France basically held Paris and the Ile-de-France, and the Duke of Burgundy held a lot of what's now the rest of France and so forth. But it took a while to unify the nation, but there was a lot of fighting. And so you'll find a lot of fortified towns from that period. This is one of them. And not all of them are quite so radical. It's also common, for example, to find what's called a bastide, which is a flatland town built with 4 walls, and the buildings are in the walls, and it's partly defensible, at least, in case there are marauding armies. But this one, and again, you know, I'm a little out of shape now, but in those days I was able to climb up. Well, you can't drive up there, you have to climb up. And one of the things I discovered was there was a school in this town, and not quite a university yet, but the kind of church school out of which the university tradition would shortly thereafter grow. And this school had a library. Now, the library was fairly small. Library was about maybe half the size of the typical classroom at my college, and they're fairly small. How many books do you think this library had? Well, it had 6 books, only 6 books. And they were, of course, done by hand on vellum and hand lettered and, you know, with the drawings and so forth. If they survived today, they would not be in that library. They are museum pieces. And even when they did survive in that library, they were not circulating. Basically, each book was chained to a bench, and the students, who were all monks or clerics, would queue up behind the book. They had to read all 6 of them in the course of their education. And the guy at the head of the queue would read until he dropped, fell asleep. Students didn't have coffee in those days. So they push him out of the way, the back of the room. The next guy would come up and he'd read until and that's how they get their reading done. So here's an example of one of the books that was in this library, The Sentences of Peter Lombard. And everybody read the same 6 books. Now you might say, yay, because there are courses now, particularly some literature courses, in which there are more than 6 books assigned for a single course. So wouldn't that be easy? You only have to read 6 books in the course of your bachelor's degree. Yeah, but you had to know those 6 books intensively. Examinations were, for example, this book, write a commentary on the Sentences of Peter Lombard, a book which everybody's read and everybody has commented upon. And now you've got to say something unique and distinctive that nobody else before you has ever said about this book. Oh, wow. That's not an easy task. Another examination format, examinations could be oral. On the day of the examination, anybody going through the university town could stop and ask questions. So if St. Thomas Aquinas happened to be riding his mule, or Albertus Magnus happened to be in, the greatest philosophers in the world could come to your philosophy exam and pose you some questions. So not necessarily an easier road to hoe, but certainly fewer books. Now, you should be becoming acquainted as you go through higher education with the difference between academic libraries, such as you find in here at our college or great universities, and on the other hand, public libraries. Increasingly, you're going to find you want to use academic libraries rather than public libraries, with very few exceptions. Okay. We have a library here at our college, small college. The library at Rocamadour had 6 books. How many books do you think our library has? And again, in face-to-face classes, students usually say, 1,000, 2,000. Well, I finally got the librarian to tell me. I've been asking this for a while. And at the time she told me this a couple of years ago, it was exactly 45,377 books. Okay, well, that's a lot of books. A lot more books than I have in my library. A lot more books than Rocamadour had in the entire school library there. Now, if you go to UCLA, there are even more books. In fact, what's typical at UCLA, you see the same thing at USC here. There are multiple libraries. So at UCLA, there's the undergraduate library, and if you matriculate there for your junior, senior year, that's the main library you're going to use. There's the graduate research library, which is more specialized, and particularly advanced undergraduates will use that too. The School of Law has its own library. The School of Education has its own library. In fact, most of the books in the UCLA libraries are not housed on the UCLA campus. There's so many books, there's an overflow. So now they have, and this is not untypical of many big schools, they have a remote facility. So some of the books are on campus, the main, most frequently used ones, but you may have to go to the front desk and fill out a slip and say, I want to see this book. Okay, come back in 2 days. And there are these trucks going back and forth constantly between the repository off campus and the campus libraries themselves, delivering all these books. And your book will show up in 2 days, and then you'll check it out for 2 weeks or whatever the period is. How many books do you think UCLA has? Now, Southwest College, 45,000. UCLA, 12 million. So, whereas, at least you get a bar that you can look at here comparing Southwest College and Rocamadour. And now both bars kind of disappear, are dwarfed by the bar representing UCLA. What is this all about? Well, here it is, knowledge explosion. The growth of schools and colleges parallels the growth and complexity of human knowledge. As knowledge has grown, so too schools have grown and become more differentiated and more specialized. We can see the specialization of knowledge at work if we examine how school systems evolved in higher education. We're going to look at the medieval university, what the university became in the 19th century, what it then became subsequently down to our own day. But I have to give you a warning label here first, and that is this. Be very careful about confusing schooling with education. They are not one and the same thing. Now, those of us who work in schools, like me, hope that school has something to do with education. But we also know that, it's possible to pass through a school, get a diploma on the wall, and still not know much. If you go for a job, your employer is not going to be impressed with your GPA or the sheepskin you have on the wall. It's going to be impressed with what you can do and what you actually know. Those are not necessarily one and the same thing. And it's also possible to get an education without going to school. There are people called autodidacts, self-taught people, and some of them can be quite brilliant. I'll talk to you when we talk about Socrates about a guy by the name of I.F. Stone, who was a muckraking journalist, but he got so interested in Socrates, he taught himself Greek, and read the classic text in the original language, and produced a work on the trial of Socrates that remains highly respected by professional scholars in classics. That's kind of rare, but it can be done. One of the problems with being an autodidact, though, is you tend to be rough around the edges. You won't get quite the breadth of knowledge. You may develop some of the specialization, but optimally, if you're in a good school, your education can proceed and can become well-rounded as well as specialized. But in any case, they're not one and the same thing. So as Mark Twain tells us, I have never let my schooling, interfere with my education. That's good advice. Even though we talk about I'm going to talk about the way in which the growth of schools, colleges, and universities parallels the growth of human knowledge, the two are not the same thing. So, as Smokey the Bear tells us, only you can prevent your schooling from interfering with your education. Okay, let's think about the medieval university. The university as such is one of the major legacies of the Middle Ages. And I know we tend to poo-poo the Middle Ages. I'm going to go all medieval on this guy. It has a bad reputation for being the Dark Ages, but it is the period of time that gave us a number of interesting developments, including the higher education, the university system as we come to know it. University of Bologna, 1088, claims to be the oldest one. Oxford contests that, although, it's back and forth between those two, but still, 900 years ago, basically. Universities developed as an outgrowth of the cathedral schools and the school, like I talked about at Rocamadour. They trained the clergy, not only in theology, which was thought of as the queen of the sciences, but the 7 liberal arts. And these were divided in turn into 2 columns, the trivium and the quadrivium. Hey, guess what? Trivium from the number 3, quadrivium from 4. Under the trivium was dialectic, which more or less corresponds to what we would call philosophy today. It's primarily logic, but at least it's the recognizable embryo of philosophy as a university discipline. Now, fast forward from the Middle Ages to the 19th century, the reforms of Wilhelm von Humboldt at the University of Berlin. Science disciplines are increasingly added to the curriculum, and here we begin to get a really clear distinction, which I suggest it goes back to Socrates, a real clear distinction organizationally between the arts and the sciences. Typically, you're going to find a college of arts and a college of sciences. They may go by different names. Arts may be called humanities, science may be called natural sciences, but this division, is pretty basic. And so under the arts column, we have things like languages, like literature, like history, music, classics. There are unfortunately not much classics anymore. Classics used to be the core of university education 200 years ago. And now it's hard to find a classics department. It's funny, Greek letter societies, the frats and sororities on larger campuses, they used Greek letters because knowing Greek was the mark of an educated person. And people who were non-collegiate wouldn't, be kind of mysterious to them. At some point in the 20th century, though, fraternities and sororities had to start publishing in their handbooks a list of the Greek alphabet because the students were no longer studying the classics. They didn't even know the Greek letters. So, Kappa, Gamma, Rho, whatever, you'd have to look it up. Right? But in any case, philosophy in sense P2, also one of these arts disciplines. So P1, philosophy in the sense of the Western tradition of rational inquiry as such, encompasses the whole thing, but now increasingly P2 is one specialized discipline among all the others, and it fits into the arts column rather than the sciences column. In the sciences column, things like physics, astronomy, geography, biology, chemistry, the usual suspects. By the way, is chemistry a science? Well, what a foolish question. Of course, everyone would say, of course, chemistry is a science, and indeed, today it is. But believe it or not, there was a time not too long ago in which that was in dispute. 1839, Cambridge University takes a vote. Should we or should we not admit chemistry to the science faculty? The vote was 50-50, split. And the chancellor of the university, this was Prince Albert at the time, cast the deciding vote. He decided in favor of including chemistry. And so chemistry ever since has been included in the sciences in Cambridge. And good thing too, because chemistry in Cambridge has done some important things. For example, if you're familiar with DNA, the structure of DNA was elucidated in physics at Cambridge by Watson and Crick in 1953. Had the decision gone the other way in 1839, who knows what would have become of that. Now, isn't it curious? Why would anybody vote against chemistry being a science? Well, the reasoning was, believe it or not, this way. Well, physics, you know, that's Isaac Newton sitting in the quad and watching the apple fall and, you know, making some large calculations. And of course, our young gentlemen, students, that's precisely the sort of thing we want them to do. But chemistry is what working class guys do in smelly laboratories. It has to do with you know, alchemy and this kind of disreputable stuff that it goes on in garages and you get your hands dirty. And we don't really want our young gentlemen to learn this sort of thing. It was class snobbery, basically. In fairness, the chemistry in 1839 was in its infancy. Lavoisier had already worked some things out. Mendeleev was in the process of working some things out. But the real successes in industrial chemistry wouldn't come until later in the 19th century. And so it was not quite so clear that chemistry ranked up there with astronomy and with physics and so forth at that time. In the 20th century, continued knowledge explosion has added yet a third column, a new bunch of disciplines called the social sciences. And depending on the size of the university, I think as much as anything else, you may find a separate school of social sciences. So 3 columns: School of Arts or Humanities, School of Natural Sciences, and the School of Social Sciences. Sometimes, however, particularly in smaller colleges, social sciences will be assimilated to one of the other colleges. And indeed, in the social sciences themselves, there's still some controversy over where they belong. Take sociology, for example. Founded by Auguste Comte in the Sorbonne, he didn't actually use the word sociology. There's a whole interesting story about that. I don't have time to get into, but it's an interesting one. He used the term social physics to describe his study of society, and he really thought that he was like Isaac Newton. He was going to discover some laws of social organization, just like the laws of nature, that was going to explain everything. So if you asked Auguste Comte, founder of sociology, are you more like the arts or more like the sciences? He said, clearly the sciences. I mean, I'm clearly a branch of physics. That's what I'm doing. On the other hand, there are sociologists working sociologists today, who spend their entire time hanging around in bars, watching interaction among groups of 2 people or groups of 3 people, basically doing anthropological field work. And the difference between the number 2 and the number 3, for example, is very important. The sociologist by the name of Georg Simmel pioneered this, but others have followed up. 2 people, each person has to be constantly engaged in the interaction. If one person drops the ball, the interaction falls apart. Groups of 3 or more, though, one person at least can sit it out for a while and the interaction still goes on. Also, with groups of 3 or more, it's easier to lie than it is with groups of only 2. Okay, here's an example. Who farted in the elevator? If it's only 2 of you, there's no plausible deniability there. If there's more than 2, there could be. So a person like this, sociologist like this, you ask them, where do you fit? You fit in the sciences, the arts. They say, oh, in the arts. And I'm doing more or less what a literary scholar would do in interpreting action. Now, so a sociologist might go one way or another. Psychology. Sigmund Freud, often thought of as the founder of psychology, but if you read the typical American psychology textbook, Freud belongs in the prehistory of it all. He's not a real psychologist. Now, Freud would say, and if you look at his works, what I'm doing is really more like the arts. He did, of course, clinical psychoanalysis, but He wrote books like Civilization and Its Discontents, Moses and Monotheism, The Future of an Illusion. And he was doing more or less what we would call cultural studies or maybe even history, clearly among the arts. I think he would agree with that. He would agree with that point of view to a certain extent. On the other hand, in America, you know, if you study psychology, the story you get is, oh, Freud, it was just a prehistory. He was talking about unconscious and all this kind of stuff, and id and ego and superego, stuff you can't observe. And psychology is really about observing behavior. Rats are great to observe because they're simple behavioral models and we can extrapolate from them. So if you asked a psychologist like B.S. Skinner or John Watson and major behaviorists, does psychology fit in the arts or the sciences? They said, clearly in the sciences. We're basically applied biology. You know, we're a branch of biology. So again, in psychology as in sociology, you can have this, still have this tension. Anthropology. I haven't mentioned this yet. I guess I met my wife when she was a student in a program I was directing called PACE through Mission College, and she was an employee of LA Unified, and we had a lot of the paraprofessionals from LA Unified among our student population. And I remember the semester she joined, we were fortunate enough to get Professor Sam Sant from Harbor College to come over to our college for this semester, and he taught physical anthropology. And one of the things that he taught the students was how to age and sex a skeleton. You can look at a skeleton if you know what to look for. You can tell how old that person was, male or female. You can tell what kind of occupation they had. You can tell their nutrition, lots of things by looking at the skeleton. And he taught them how to do this. And I remember the final exam in the class was he brought in a different skeleton and he said, okay, now you guys tell me age and sex, and they could do it, you know, after 8 weeks of instruction. I remember this particularly because my wife entered the cohort late, but I started with this cohort a year and a half before. And these were older adults, working adults, 30, 40 years old, but out of high school for a long time. They were scared witless. They were about to quit. And here it is, you know, year and a half later, and they're just having the greatest time, you know, with this skeleton, and now they know something, and they can show it. You know, it's great to see. But if you ask Sam or someone like that, you know, you're an anthropologist, does that fit in the arts or the sciences? He'd clearly say in the sciences. We're doing biology, we're doing chemistry, we're analyzing physical remains. On the other hand, there are anthropologists who it's been increasingly hard to do this now because we've kind of run out of primitive societies, but they would go into a primitive society and live with the people and become a member of the tribe. It was one of the dangers was going too native. Usually they would get a name and they would take on an identity, and they would sometimes dress like the people they were studying. But in order to come back to our community and say, okay, this is what these guys are all about, this is what their way of life is. You go walk in somebody's moccasins, and then you can see how life looks like from a different point of view. By the way, before you ever criticize another human being, first, walk a mile in his moccasins. And that way, if you still want to criticize him, you'll be a mile away and you'll have his moccasins. So, even though there may have developed a third column alongside arts and sciences, it's still, you know, maybe torn between those two. Now, here's the problem. You know, you may think this is kind of abstract, but there is a practical application for you guys as beginning undergraduate students, and that is this. You will face a forest and trees problem. You know, you don't want to fail to see the forest because you're looking at the individual trees, but you don't want to fail to see that the forest is in fact made up of individual trees. See the forest, see the trees, don't choose between one or the other. There's a dilemma there, but you don't want a false dilemma. What's the tree and forest metaphor all about? It's about depth and breadth. Okay, you could become very, very specialized and see nothing but a bunch of trees. Or you can become so generalized that you don't specialize at all and you miss a lot about detail. And it's not a good idea to miss either of these things. We come back to, I mentioned this before, the dilemma of the science and the humanities. Charles Percy Snow calls this in the late 50s, the two cultures problem. It was a problem in his day. Let me suggest that the problem is not for all the attention that he's drawn to it, not necessarily gone away. People in the arts, humanities, and people in the sciences seem to speak two different languages. And C.P. Snow, who came from the science side himself, says this. Again, I don't like to read slides, but it's worth doing this here. So I'll read it to you. A good many times, says Snow, I have been present at gatherings of people who, by the standards of the traditional culture, are thought highly educated and who have, with considerable gusto, been expressing their incredulity at the illiteracy of scientists. Once or twice I have been provoked and have asked the company how many of them could describe the second law of thermodynamics. The response was cold. It was also negative. And yet I was asking something which is the scientific equivalent of, have you read a work of Shakespeare's? I now believe that if I had asked an even simpler question, such as, what do you mean by mass or acceleration, which is the scientific equivalent of saying, can you read? Not more than 1 in 10 of the highly educated would have felt I was speaking the same language. So, he concludes, the great edifice of modern physics goes up, and the majority of the cleverest people in the Western world have about as much insight into it as their Neolithic ancestors would have had. This, if true, must be a problem. Snow's concern was with the way people in higher education and humanities have no more insight into science than their ancestors living in caves. One might also, of course, worry about the scientific literacy of the general public. True story, National Science Survey, 26% of Americans, if you ask them, does the sun go around the earth or the earth go around the sun, 26%, a quarter, will say, oh, well, of course the sun goes around the earth. We talk about sunrise and sunset, don't we? And, you know, this is one of the things that people pull up to talk about the scientific literacy of Americans. That's certainly a topic we've seen recently in the discussions about the pandemic and whether we can safely ignore science and all that kind of stuff. Actually, 33% of Europeans, as opposed to 26% of Americans, were similarly bamboozled. We don't often hear that part of the story. But humanities people have also worried about scientists. Scientists are cultural barbarians, they think. What does John Keats famously say? Philosophy will clip an angel's wings, conquer all mysteries by rule and line, empty the haunted air and gnomed mind, unweave a rainbow. We murder to dissect. Yes, a long-standing conflict from the Romantics, at least onwards. So we have a situation where we've got these two hostile tribes in what's supposed to be organization of higher education. You've got the science tribe with its spears and clubs posed against the humanities tribe with its spears and clubs. So forest or trees, breadth or depth, science or humanities, do we have to choose? You know, in logic class, we talk about dilemmas, and a dilemma is a choice posed between two alternatives supposed to be mutually exclusive, but sometimes they are indeed mutually exclusive, and sometimes they're not. They're, in other words, true dilemmas and they're false dilemmas, okay? I go to a party, somebody says to me, what do you want, red wine or white wine? Well, I choose, I got 2 hands, give me a glass of each. Problem solved. Not all possible dilemmas are actually true dilemmas. Brillat-Savarin had a solution to this. He could either dine with scientists or men of letters. He said, choice is made, I'll dine twice. No problem. He was a rather large fellow. Now, a liberal education aims to strike a balance between specialization and general knowledge, between depth and breadth, as well as between the sciences and the humanities. But how to do this? Well, how to do this is a matter of how we organize schools and degree requirements. Remember, schooling and education, not the same thing. Don't let your schooling interfere with your education, but schooling doesn't have to impede your education either. In higher education, what we do, we have a compromise, and that is to steer you guys as undergraduate students from initial breadth to eventual depth. You go through a funnel. This has changed. I started, I think I mentioned freshman year 1971, which was still the 60s. You know, there was the 60s and then there was the legend of the 60s. The 60s didn't really end till 1979, but prior to the 60s, typical pattern for undergraduate education was all freshmen take the same courses: English 101, History 101, Biology 101, whatever the case may be, and everybody goes in lockstep. Then in the 60s, the pendulum began to swing in the direction of more choice. Well, you can choose an elective course here, or you could even choose to make up your own major. If you could get two professors in different areas to sign off on a major jointly between those two disciplines, go for it. You could take a degree in, I can't imagine what, but the pendulum kind of swung from one extreme to another extreme, and then eventually came back more or less in the middle, and that's where we still are today, which is this. If you look at our college's graduation requirements in our catalog, and you'll find this in every other catalog, same way, you'll find that there are certain areas that you need to take in freshman and sophomore year, and of course in community college, that's our first 2 years. General education requirements are called. So you have to have something in the natural sciences, but you don't have to have chemistry 101. There's a variety of courses you can choose. You have to have something in critical thinking. Well, logic is one obvious way to do that, but there is an English course, there's in our school, we're kind of small, in some other schools, there's more options. You choose which course it is, but you fulfill that area. You need to have something in the humanities. You need to have something in the social sciences, whatever the case may be. And so when you're freshman, sophomore year, you're taking a variety of courses. You're going to fulfill some general degree requirements, but what you can take is open to you. And you can take courses, and you should take courses in a variety of areas. Think of it as a smorgasbord. Don't just take all desserts. Take some meat, some veg, some bread, some pasta, some dessert, whatever the case may be, and explore. Because often you're not going to know coming in what you want to do. I'll tell you my own story. I started off freshman year at Michigan State University. And the reason I started off at Michigan State University was I got some scholarship money. I did rather well on standardized tests, including the National Scholarship Merit Qualifying Test, Scholarship Qualifying Test. Also SATs, I did well. So I pretty much had my choice of schools. I was accepted at UCLA, I was accepted at Georgetown, I was accepted, of course, at Michigan State, I was also accepted at Harvard. But I think, as I mentioned before, my family was very poor at that time, and I wasn't getting a lot of financial aid offers. So Michigan State offered me a full package between work and scholarship and loans, and it was the best deal I was going to get. So I went to Michigan State. It turns out some canny vice president in the 1950s had managed to get Michigan State's name on the top of the National Scholarship Merit Qualifying Test, so National Merit Scholarship Qualifying Test. So there were 3 boxes to tick. One was Michigan State, one was the National Negro College Fund, that was going to help me, and I forget what the third one was. But as a result, almost everybody ticked off the appropriate box, and Michigan State got all the scores from the National Merit finalists, and they ended up taking about 96% of that nationwide student population on as freshmen. I was one of those. I later, well, I'll tell you the rest of the story a little bit later, but I had no idea. I could have gone to Harvard, except I couldn't find a way to pay for it. But if I knew then what I know now about Harvard, I think I would have begged, borrowed, and stolen. There was this 18-year-old kid who ruined my life, and if I could catch him by the nose, I'd kick him in the ass, but I can't find him anymore. Who is that 18-year-old kid? Me. I grew up, my parents did not go to university. My brother and sister and I were the first generation who did, and we all finished bachelor's degrees. But it was drilled into us, college, you're going to college. We didn't come from a background where we knew there was a difference between Harvard and many of the others. I had no idea. So I just went where the money was. And I went up, I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. I thought I wanted to be a politician. I was an Army brat, and I eventually concluded that I wouldn't be able to do that. If I had succeeded, I probably would have become someone like Newt Gingrich. Newt Gingrich actually was an Army brat who managed to get into Good Old Boys Network and get into Congress, etc. I'm so glad I didn't go that route. I hope I never would have become Newt Gingrich, but that was the kind of direction which I was going. And then I got up to university and I made a discovery. Here was the discovery. When I was in high school, somebody said to me, "Oh, you must be interested in philosophy." And I said, "What's philosophy?" Well, we had a small section in the high school library. So I went there and I picked out the biggest, thickest book I could find. It was by a German fellow by the name of Kant, called The Critique of Pure Reason. And I opened it and began to read. I got about half a page through. I realized I can't understand what the hell this guy's saying. Whatever philosophy is, it's not for me. Well, when I got up to university, I started to take philosophy, and then I had some people there who could explain it to me and take me through and show me the ropes as I'm in turn trying to show you the ropes. Oh, that made all the difference in the world. I got very interested in philosophy. So you may not know at the beginning, what you want to do, and you'll discover some things along the way if you allow yourself to be broad enough. Another thing I discovered, this is pick up my story. So I had a year at Michigan State, and I'm looking forward to going back. A week before school was about to start, I get a letter saying, your financial aid has been terminated. There's only a week to go. And now I later learned that this was not an uncommon step. Michigan State gets all these national merit finalists, and then they drop them abruptly, thinking, well, we've got them hooked. Because it really is a good university. It was a great experience. No question about that. But the out-of-state tuition was fearsome. And in order to qualify for in-state tuition, you'd have to drop out of school for a year, work in the state of Michigan, establish residency, and then come back. I never thought it was a good idea to lose momentum. I didn't want to do that. So here I am, bags packed, ready to go, a week away, and I'm out in the cold. Well, my family lived in Key West, and there was a local community college, Florida Keys Community College. So I enrolled there to do my sophomore year, which I did. And very happy about it. Very different school, but I got some things there that I didn't get at Michigan State. I missed some things too. Michigan State had this tremendous library. Oh my goodness, I could lose myself in that library. And Florida Keys, much smaller, but I got a work-study job. There was only one psychology professor. That's how small we were, much smaller than Southwest College. But I got a work-study job working with her. And there was a philosophy professor who was normally out here at Occidental College in LA, but he was on sabbatical for a year and he was teaching at my college. So I was about the only philosophy student. So basically it was like having a tutorial. I could talk to him about philosophy anytime I wanted, as well as taking these courses. So that worked out. In the psychology department, my teacher had a great library, and her husband was also a psychologist. He was a clinical psychologist. She was teaching psychologist research, both behaviorists. And I learned about psychology, which I'd never discovered. One of the first things I learned about psychology, I had the illusion that maybe a lot of other people have. Oh, you can learn to psych out your friends. You can learn how to manipulate people. That's what psychology is all about. That's not what psychology is all about. It's about some other things, some of them interesting. I took intensively some psychology, and my teacher and her husband were both behaviorists. I came to the conclusion within a year that whatever I might want to do with psychology, it was not behaviorism. But that's okay, because, it takes many people years and years to figure that kind of thing out. And I got a crash course. So again, I came into university, had no idea what philosophy was, had no idea what psychology was. These are two areas that it turns out I would see on my diploma one way or another. So again, play with it while you can. So if you're, you took a course in 19th century novel, and you're taking a course in cultural anthropology, and you find both of them interesting. So, work around and see what you can do. Because what's going to happen is, as you progress, you're going to go through this funnel I have here. You've got this whole smorgasbord to choose from. And at the end of the 4 years, at the end of the funnel, you're going to come out with a major subject and usually a minor subject, sometimes two minors. Or you can even have a joint major sometimes, but it's going to be a narrowing down of options. So now is your time to play, freshman, sophomore year, because you're going to have less time to play the longer you go through school as time goes on. Think about it again as a smorgasbord. Take a variety of dishes, because as you go on, if you get to graduate school, for example, you're not going to have the option to get dessert. You're going to be eating turkey legs only, or whatever the course happens to be. Chemistry 500, chemistry 501, chemistry 598, chemistry 642. You're going to be taking courses in your department. As you enter the two last years of undergraduate work, this junior and senior year, you're going to be pressed by your counselor to declare a major. You are going to have to declare a major in order to graduate. You'll have a degree in a certain major field and a certain minor field, or more than one. So you're going to have less options. So if you decide, you want to go go physics, then you can't take that course in James Joyce that you wanted to take in the English department, interesting though it was. Hold that thought though, because this is not the end of the story, but there is a certain narrowing that goes on as time goes along. Now, you can put off the major decision for a while. It's certainly too early to make that decision now, freshman, sophomore year, although we do encourage you to think about it, some possible majors, knowing that you might well discover some things that you haven't even thought about yet at this point. When you get to junior year, your counselor is going to push you. You don't have to do it immediately, but you will probably by senior year, certainly by senior year, have to do that. But you may find some surprises. Here's some more of my story. And, in one hand, I wish I could say to you, well, I had a plan and I planned my work and I worked my plan. No, I bumbled along. My life in terms of schooling, but also in terms of some other things in my life, is an extraordinary tale of bumbling along and just getting lucky, just pure dumb luck. For example, I finished my associate's degree at Florida Keys Community College. So let me back to Florida Keys before I take you on where I'm going after this. I took the AA degree there, which I'm very proud to have. And by the way, you should also be thinking about an AA degree for one particular reason, and that's this. And a lot of people say, well, AA, it's just a kind of a stepping stone to a bachelor's. Bachelor's more important, blah, blah, blah. No. Has anybody ever heard of the California Master Plan? California Master Plan went into effect in the early 1960s. It was a model educational plan, and it still is considered to be that around the world. Part of what it's a kind of a comprehensive plan for Cal States, UCs, and community colleges, all of the public ones. One of the provisions that the California Master Plan has is this. If you take an associate's degree, Associate of Arts, Associate of Science, from a California community college, and you matriculate to a public university, either Cal State or UC, with an AA degree, by virtue of holding that AA degree, you have already satisfied the general education requirements of that particular university to which you matriculate. Now, you satisfy the general education requirements in order to get the associate's degree in the first place. If you go to UC or CSU, they may have some different requirements for their freshmen and sophomores, so that's okay. You bypass that. You go immediately to junior standing, and you don't have to jump through those hoops that those guys had to jump through if they started there at those schools as opposed to starting where you start. That's a good thing. So definitely, and you get the same number of units whether you graduate or not to transfer, and they're, if you're going to from a community college to a Cal State or UC, they're all transferable for the most part. But having that degree in addition to having the number of units, very, very important. Now, what I told you is true, but listen very carefully to the next thing that I'm going to tell you, because it catches some people sometimes badly. Simply because you may have met the general ed requirements for the university by virtue of having a degree from a community college, and you will, does not mean also necessarily that you have satisfied the general ed requirements for the particular college which is going to grant the degree in your major. Okay, here's what that means. Say, for example, just hypothetically, say you're an engineering student. Okay, so you come from a community college, you got your AA, boom, you're junior year engineering student. So the university as such is not going to say to you, you have these general ed requirements to do, but the College of Engineering might. Let's say, for example, maybe they're worried, or somebody in the university is worried, that engineers don't get enough literary background, the two cultures background. So maybe there's a special course for literature for engineers, or engineering and literature, or something like that, and that's a graduation requirement for an engineering degree. Yes, you are bound to that requirement, hypothetical requirement. If you don't meet that requirement, you don't graduate. And, sometimes this can catch people by surprise. Well, but I came with the AA degree, I satisfied the general education. Yes, you did. But you didn't satisfy the general requirements of the particular school. And this almost caught me up. I was senior year, last semester of my senior year, and I was told I needed another history course. Well, okay, so I took a basic entry-level history course, which you might think was a waste of time. Actually, it turned out not to be. The professor was a historian of the French army. He'd written a biography of a French general in World War I, and had actually managed to interview the widow of this general. And this was back, in the 60s when she was kind of old, but she was still alive. He was dead. But, it was great. He could tell us all about, this general staff in World War I. It wasn't, the course was, Western civilization from, 1800 to the present, but he had a specialty in that area and knew a hell of a lot about it. It was a terribly interesting course. I'm so glad I took it. But, there could be situations, particularly in California, where courses are impacted. And sometimes it takes people 5 years to finish a 4-year degree because they've got, one requirement hanging there, and the class isn't going to be offered, isn't going to be open for another year. And so, they have to hang around before they finish their bachelor's degree just to get that one course. So don't get caught up in that situation. Do get your AA degree, but also be aware. And the best way to handle this is make sure as soon as possible that you do get a counselor at your upper division with whom you work regularly. And our counselors here can tell you about matriculation and so forth, but you also want to hook up with someone at the particular school in question. They're going to know that better than anybody from the outside. So here I am. I'm going to matriculate. I've got my AA degree. This is in Florida. Rules are kind of similar. And Florida at that point had two major universities, state universities, Florida State in Tallahassee and University of Florida in Gainesville. Now, my brother and sister both matriculated to Gainesville, and I've not heard the end of that. And my sister's children, are constantly teasing me because I went to the other one. I went to Florida State. And why did I go to Florida State? For the simple, dumb reason, I had nothing to choose between the two of them. Simple, dumb reason that I started my undergraduate language at Michigan State. It was Greek. In those days, one needed an undergraduate language, one also needed a graduate language. I think these requirements have become somewhat loosened subsequently, but Florida State was the only one of the two that offered Greek. So if I went to University of Florida, I'd lose a year and have to start another language. Who wants to do that? I went to Tallahassee. And when I got there, I discovered something that I didn't know and probably couldn't have predicted, and that was this. I was interested in philosophy. I was interested in psychology. The philosophy department had some interesting classes in social philosophy, but mostly it was Anglo-American analytic philosophy of the sort that I always found and still do find quite boring, even as a philosophy teacher. The psychology department was really behaviorist and was interested in running rats. But there was a religious studies department that was basically a colony of Harvard. So, Harvard graduates have to go somewhere. I didn't get to go to Harvard, but Harvard kind of came to me. And in the religious studies department, there were great courses in psychology. You could take a course in Freud, which they really weren't interested in the psychology department. There were courses in existentialism. There were courses in German philosophy, Nietzsche and Hegel, which the philosophy department thought, those are the Germans. They wouldn't have to worry about them. There was also an interesting sociology component, which I discovered in the religion department. There were two sociology of religion courses in my university. The one in the religion department was clearly heads and tails the more interesting course. There was one sociology of knowledge course, and it was not taught in the sociology department, it was taught in the religion department. So I discovered the religion department, and I never thought about becoming a religion major as part of this thing, but it was a great department. It had all the interesting courses, interesting faculty, and wow. So what happened is eventually, when I got to my senior year, I could have gone philosophy, psychology, or religious studies. And I went religious studies. And in the process, I had discovered sociology of religion, decided that's where I wanted to go subsequently. But I just got a late start in religion, even though I had enough credits for a major. I noticed of sociologists of religion that their big weakness is most of them don't know anything about religion. They know something about sociology. So I wanted to remedy that. So I stayed on for a further degree in religion and then transferred to sociology for my last degree. And that's kind of unusual, particularly given what I said about the arts and the sciences. But it's at least technically possible to do, and it's what in fact I did. So I learned, and I'll come back to that in a minute. I learned just kind of by a hook and by crook, but that may not be untypical. You're going to learn some things along the way that you wouldn't have predicted, and you may find that there are some quirky things. My general advice is take advantage of wherever you are. There are always advantages and disadvantages. I started off at a major university, Michigan State, great library, overwhelming number of students. I ended up at Florida State, about equally big. I remember sitting in graduation in the bleachers, and I'd been there for 2 years at this point. I turned around, there's some people behind me, got to talking to them. It turned out they were majoring in my same department, religion. In 2 years going to class, I had never met these people. That's how big it was. So, you know, you can get overwhelmed in a big school. At Florida Keys Community College, my sophomore year, very small school. I got very intensive contact with the psychology professor, very intensive contact with the philosophy professor in ways that would not have happened at Michigan State or Florida State. So, you know, again, there are advantages and disadvantages. Take advantage, I would say, of what advantages you find, and you may find some very surprising ones. Okay, so let's look at the degree progression here. You guys are working for an AA or an AS, and what does that stand for? Well, the A, first A stands for associate, and the second A for art, the S for science. So you'll take a degree in Associate of Arts or Associate of Science. But at this point, that's just symbolic because, again, you're not specializing. And you don't want to become too narrow and for some of the reasons that I mentioned. Okay, finish that degree and take that degree with you, by the way. Finish that, oops, and you'll go on then to upper division. You'll go for either a BA or a BS. And what does that stand for? B stands for bachelor's, and the A and the S are the same. Bachelor of Arts or Bachelor of Sciences. But now the A and the S are going to mean something because, again, if you decide you're going to major in physics and sciences, then you're going to have to take fewer English courses, fewer anthropology courses. If you decide that you're going to major in music, in the arts, you're going to have to take fewer biology courses. And you may even be able to combine a major in the arts with a minor in the sciences. That's possible. But by and large, insofar as you're concentrating on your major, that's going to narrow your options. You're going to be, focused increasingly. So you have to make some choices. Now, graduate with an AA, go on to a BA, BS, AA or AS, BA, BS. And at that point, if you go on for further schooling, oops, I keep going the wrong way. Then you're going to cross the green line. You're going to go into graduate school. And the boundary there is undergraduate education is anything up to the bachelor's degree. Graduate education is anything beyond the bachelor's degree. So there you're going to go for a master's degree, either an MA, guess what? Master of Arts, MS, Master of Science. Now you're really specialized. In fact, when you apply to graduate school, you don't apply to the university so much as you apply to the department. So if you want to go for a master's degree in English, you apply to the English department, get accepted there. If you want to go for a master's in chemistry, you go to the chemistry department, so on and so forth. Now, graduate education is a little different than undergraduate education. It's different for one thing. But basically, here's how it works. In graduate school, you take a certain amount of coursework. Once you finish your coursework, then you sit an exam called a comprehensive exam, COMPS for short. This could be depending anywhere from a half a day to several days in length. Your professors set essay questions for you, then they read the essay questions and they decide pass or fail. If you fail, you go down. If you pass, you move along, and then you go to the stage where you write a master's thesis. Now, what's a master's thesis? A master's thesis is a major work. It's not a book yet. Think of it as maybe a couple, 2 or 3 good upper division term papers put together. It has to show some originality, and basically what you do, if you get beyond the comp stage and you go to the thesis stage, is you choose a committee that's going to supervise your research, but you get the choice of the committee. You get a major professor and then a couple others, usually from the same department, but sometimes you can get an extra person from another department if it's related. And you sit down with your committee and you say, okay, this is what I'd like to do for a thesis. If everybody agrees, then you start drafting your chapters. You show the chapters to the members of the committee. They come back with feedback from comments for you. It goes back and forth like this until everybody agrees that it's time for a defense. And then the defense is scheduled. It's a public meeting anybody can attend. The committee members you've chosen sit at a table, you, the candidate, in front of them, and everybody's read your thesis, and then they ask you questions. They ask you to defend it. It's a defense. If you defend it, you pass with a degree. If not, you go down. And actually, there's an interesting story here. The skills that go into choosing a graduate committee to oversee a thesis or later dissertation defense is a real set of skills. And, a lot of people think, oh, geez, so-and-so is a specialist in medieval history. All they know is medieval history, and that's very narrow, and it doesn't have, a lot of transfer to other walks of life. No, 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 no. If you can manage a graduate committee composed of professors who have to make judgment on your work, you have some organizational managerial skills. The best story I can tell you in this, it happened at Florida State when I was in the master's program in religion. There was a guy in the doctoral program in English, and he deliberately chose 2 faculty members who were mortal enemies for his committee. Time comes for the dissertation defense. They start arguing with each other. They take up the entire time. He doesn't have to say a bloody word. Passed. He's still a professor in Florida now, probably getting ready to retire. Yeah, so, anybody who can manage that lot of people can manage a bunch of other people as well. You've got some real skills there. It takes those to do that. Okay. Once you finish with the master's thesis, if you want to go on yet to further schooling, you go on for a doctoral degree known as a PhD. We'll come back to that in a minute. Now, a PhD program is a master's program on steroids. Same basic format. Take courses. Once you finish with the courses, you set the comprehensive exam. And then if you pass that, you go on to the dissertation stage. You form a committee, write a proposal. If everybody agrees, you start writing your chapters and, back and forth and back and forth. Now, a doctoral dissertation has to be a little more serious than a master's thesis. It has to be an original work which breaks new scholarly ground, does something that nobody else has ever done before. Okay, and if you successfully do that for the next 15 minutes, you are the world's expert on your subject, period. Of course, there are people coming up behind you. You can hear the hoofbeats. Soon somebody else is perhaps going to become the world's expert on your subject. But for right now, that's the level of mastery you've achieved. And so, you do your thesis back and forth, do your defense. If you pass, you pass. And here's an interesting point about a PhD degree. There's several interesting points, but here's one. All the way up, we know what AS is, we know what BS is, right? MS is more of the same. What's PhD? Piled higher and deeper? No. Notice it's not a D is for doctorate. It's not a doctorate of arts or doctorate of sciences. Doctor of what? What's the PH stand for? Well, the PH stands for, believe it or not, philosophy. If you hold a PhD degree, you are an honorary philosopher, no matter what your field is. So, if you have a doctorate in chemistry, you do not hold a doctorate of chemistry, you hold a doctorate of philosophy in chemistry. And of course, if you're a philosophy guy, then you hold a doctorate of philosophy in philosophy. But everybody who holds a doctoral degree is recognized as an honorary philosopher. And this is the only remaining sense in which P1 is still important. P1 was the original academic discipline out of which all of them came. And if you reach the pinnacle of the degree platform, degree ladder, then you are an honorary philosopher, no matter what your subject is, even if it's not philosophy as a discipline. And there are people who have proposed that there be yet another level, a super PhD. I have no idea why anyone would want to do that. I remember in graduate school, there was a guy who announced very proudly the first day of graduate school, I'm going to get not 1, but 3 PhDs. I just looked at him, I said, Ron, why don't you just cut to the chase and get stupid tattooed on your forehead? What have you proven if you get 3 PhDs that you haven't proven if you got 1? But there are some people, who think maybe that should be done. Actually, in Germany, the German system, Austria included, to get a PhD, you have to write not only the one dissertation, you have to write a second dissertation called an Habilitationsschrift. And then you have the full degree. And so people with a German PhD look down on those with an American PhD and say, oh, these guys have only done half the work. They're not serious. So they really do disdain people with an American PhD. So I don't know. I mean, I hope that it doesn't get to that point. But here are some things that a PhD is not. Well, first of all, what it is. PhD is a research degree. It says, here's a person who has done so much research research so successfully that A, no longer do they need to have their research supervised by other people, but B, they are now capable of supervising the research of other people. And that's what it is. It's not a teaching degree. A person with a PhD is not a better teacher than a person with an MA or an MS. An MA and MS is basically a teaching degree. And in fact, in the English system out of which our American system comes, that is it was for many years the highest degree. The PhD degree comes out of Germany. It has infiltrated the American system. William James, as early as the 1890s, was already complaining about what he called the PhD octopus strangling Harvard. And it's certainly strangled since, to the extent that in a university, one cannot even apply for a professorship without a PhD in hand. One of the good things about our system, community college system, is we recognize the older English pattern that the Americans used to do as well. And a master's degree is a perfectly good degree. It's a teaching degree. And you don't need a doctoral degree. In fact, most of our faculty do not have doctoral degrees, and perfectly good teachers don't suffer from that. What a PhD degree is not, is it's also not a moral qualification. It doesn't mean that you're a better person. And it doesn't even mean that you're a smarter person. You know? It means that you're diligent and you have some organizational skills and you do have some specialized knowledge and you are good at research, all those things. But, you know, I spent some time in the public schools, and, you know, you learn very quickly if somebody has a doctorate, particularly if they have an EDD, which is a kind of lower doctorate than a PhD, you better bloody well call them Dr. So-and-so. They see it as a sign of moral standing. They see it as a sign of basically having smarts. And a lot of people in the public schools do internalize that point of view. You know, well, he's got a doctorate, or he's God. No. And I've seen people do some very stupid things with doctoral titles, and I've seen some people with doctoral titles, frankly, I wouldn't give 2 cents for, not because of the doctorate, but you know, that you are who you are and you know what you know, title aside. But I've seen people write books on the front page, Dr. So-and-so PhD. Why? You know, it's kind of redundant. The silliest one I ever saw was, I used to teach at Temple University in Philadelphia, and I taught at the Ambler campus, which is out in the country, which is a wonderful fall day at 8 o'clock in the morning, horse country, you know, beautiful fall day with the leaves and so forth. And then I would drive back about noon after class was over down the main line back into Philadelphia, and I passed a house on the main line, and it had a big sign, you know, like a huge campaign sign in wood, and it said, so-and-so PhD. This is like in their front yard. Why? And having a PhD is kind of like having been popular in high school. Not that I would know that, but if you were, good for you. Okay, so shut up about it already. You know, you don't have to tout it and flaunt it, and it certainly doesn't mean that you're a better human being. But you'd be surprised at how many people, even some people who hold doctoral degrees, who are not aware of that. Master's degree is a teaching degree. It means you're a master of the subject. I know the word mastery in America has some unfortunate historical associations, but think about what's the Spanish word for teacher? Maestro, maestra. You are a maestro, you are a teacher, you are a master of your subject, not mastering any human beings, but you're the master of your subject. That's what a master's degree means. In fact, in Britain, the term master, they have a slightly different history. Master is used to refer to a teacher. So we would say a principal of a school, they would say headmaster. This is the master who's, you know, the head of the whole thing. Everybody else is so-and-so is the master of maths, or so-and-so is the master of sciences. And they just use that as a common sort of term. It goes back to that older tradition. Unfortunately, what's happened to the master's degree, and I'm sorry to say this, is because it's possible to get a PhD degree, it's been looked at somewhat askance. There are, for example, what are called terminal master's degrees, that if a person gets to PhD comps and they fail the comps, sometimes the department will say, okay, we will allow you to go gracefully, not in disgrace, but you can go with a master's degree as an exit. But do not dare ask us for letters of reference, because if you do, we will tell the truth that you washed out. And that's just, you know, that's just so sad, but increasingly it happens. Master's programs have been streamlined. I gave you the traditional pathway, but sometimes theses are just dispensed with. They're simply seen as a stepping stone on the way to the PhD, which is seen as really serious. But anyway, that's in a nutshell. How, if one ascends to the ladder, and again, the ladder of schooling, not necessarily the same as an education. I do hope as you ascend to the ladder of schooling, you do get an education. It's certainly possible to do that. I think I got an education going through all this stuff, and I think I got a very good education, in fact, and it's one that has been paying me off in good stead for the length of my life so far, and it's kind of long, but it goes on longer. But basically, that's where we have it. So a person with a PhD then is a person who is a qualified researcher. They're not a better person, they're not a smarter person, they're not a better teacher, but they are. They have something. And so they're also an honorary philosopher, which is why when you go to graduation, I don't say if, I say when. When you go to graduation, you're going to see a lot of your faculty wearing hoods like this, blue hood, blue velvet. Now, each academic discipline has its own color. So, for example, if you have a master's degree in, let's say, what do we have here? Library science, it's lemon yellow. And if you have a master's degree in music, it's pink, and so on and so forth. If you have a doctoral degree, PhD in music, though, you're not going to be wearing your music color, you're going to be wearing your philosophy color. And that's why you'll see a lot of these blue hoods. The velvet, which the arrow points to there, is the discipline color, philosophy color in this case. The other, the satin, the yellow, and also blue is the college color. So you'll see different satins there, but the velvet's going to be the same. So a lot of people with blue because they are honorary philosophers, even if they weren't philosophy majors as such. Okay, so I used to be like John Belushi, and I actually have a sweatshirt like this, college on it. I just, I was going to go to college. I had no idea what the difference was between Harvard and, podunk, normal school, whatever. Maybe I was like this. But it got me through. Now, you guys have yet to get through. So let me give you some advice. We'll talk about where you may matriculate. This is very important. You have a choice, a good choice, between two kinds of schools for your junior, senior year. You can go to a public college and university, or you can go to private. And what's the difference? Funding. There are some actually that are hybrids. I mentioned Temple University, where I used to teach, University of Pittsburgh, where I studied. They're kind of both, but usually they divide into one or the other. So for example, public colleges and universities, UCLA is a good example, Cal State Northridge, another example, Florida State, where I went to school, another example. Private schools, USC, Harvard, Occidental, and so on and so forth. And any of those schools can be good choices. Here, however, is what you want to avoid, and that is the for-profits. Things like National University, University of Phoenix, etc. Actually, this wasn't a choice when I was a student. For-profit universities have only come up in the last couple of decades. They're money-making private institutions. They are close to, if not entirely, what we would call diploma mills. Often they're certified, but by the skin of their teeth. Diploma mills are by definition not certified. But please do avoid the nonprofits. Oh, they will entice you. They'll say, hey, look, you can do it your own way. University of New Hampshire, you can be a working adult and fit it in with your busy schedule. And you can, turn paper on the train and the commute in, get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and, do your studies. Maybe you can, but you will pay a price. Now, there are literal diploma mills, usually unaccredited. This is really the best degree money can buy. You pay a fee and they give you a sheepskin. The one that makes me laugh most is Gesellschaft University. Gesellschaft just means society in German. And there's obviously some suburban house here that's been decked out in fake half timbers to make it look medieval. No, don't go that way. Here's an analysis. I've divided the schools into the ideal college and university, what you should be looking for, then into public and private, then into for-profit, and then into diploma mills at the very right-hand column. And I've looked at 4 factors that you want to consider. Accreditation, whether the faculty is tenure track, what proportion of it is, whether the school has a serious library, and the graduation rate. So in an ideal college and university, you'd want to have all four of those things, and you would expect to have them. You would want accreditation. You would want a tenure track faculty. You would want a serious library, and you would want a high graduation rate. If you look at the average public or private university, accreditation, yes, and usually good accreditation. Tenure track faculty, well, this is something that's been changing in the last maybe 40 years. Increasingly, the faculty who teach you are not full-time tenure track professors in the traditional sense. They are part-time adjunct contingent, as it's sometimes called, casual labor, underpaid, underemployed, and a great deal of turnover. Now, by the way, the adjuncts may not be worse teachers. They may, in some cases, even be better teachers as teachers, but it doesn't give you the same experience. From 17% to 50% of your faculty will be tenured, depending. At the R1 universities, it's 50%, so it's 50-50 tenured, untenured. At community colleges, it's like 83% untenured. Most of you are not going to believe me when I tell you this, but most of your professors, and not just here at community college, it's in the universities as well, are earning about $20,000 to $25,000 a year. They are selling their blood plasma to put food on the table. They are collecting unemployment, which they can do in California between terms to make things meet. Some of them are doing dire things like sex work. You don't see the difference. To them, they're your professor, but many of them are in quite dire straits. It's become really, really difficult problem, even in the reputable universities and colleges. So I put that in pink rather than red. Serious library in a public and private school, yes, you should expect that. The library I described at UCLA a little earlier, USC, good library, lots of facilities, lots of resources. That's what you should expect. Graduation rate, high. UCLA, the graduation rate is 90%. That's good. You know, from entrance to graduation with a diploma, 90%, really, really. Now, for-profit universities, are they accredited? Usually, by the skin of their teeth. Do they have tenure track faculty? No, almost not at all. National University, for example, may have one full-time instructor who will not be tenured, and the rest are all part-time. Does it have a serious library? No. Okay. Spoiler alert. I'm telling you not to go to a for-profit university, and I stand by that. But I actually went to National University. I did that to get my teaching credential for the public schools. Oh, hypocrite. Well, maybe yes, maybe no. I would defend my actions based on this. I wasn't going to get an education. I was going to get a union card. Teacher training programs are weak. You don't really learn anything. It's just an occupational requirement. So, yeah, I wasn't worried about going to a reputable school. For my bachelor's degree and other degrees, oh yeah, that's another matter. So, the reason I tell you this is because having gone to National University, I saw their library. It was a joke. I have more books in my house than that university had in the entire university. It was one room sparsely populated with bookshelves, and they called it a library. No, forget it. Don't go there. Graduation rate is low. University of Phoenix, graduation rate 16%. 16%. One of the tactics that these folks use is, particularly with GI Bill money and veterans money, they take people's money until the funding is exhausted, and then they really don't, nothing happens. You certainly don't get to the point where you graduate. UCLA graduation rate 90%, Phoenix 16%. That speaks for itself. Now, let's look finally at the real literal diploma mills. Are they accredited? Never, by definition. Do they have a tenure track faculty? Never, 0%. Do they have a serious library? Never. But they do have a 100% graduation rate. UCLA only has 90%. Yeah, well, of course, because in a for-profit, in a certain diploma mill, you pay your money, you get your sheepskin. Everybody graduates as long as they have the money. So that's how these things stack up. If we give 2 points for red, 1 point for pink, and 0 points for black, public-private colleges score 6 out of 8. For-profit universities score 1 out of 8. Literal diploma mills score 2 out of 8. But the fact that they score slightly higher, even double for-profits, not necessarily anything in their favor. The for-profits are not to be confused with the diploma mills because the diploma mills grant degrees. Often the for-profits don't. Also, it's going to cost you a lot more money, okay? I gave you the model earlier. You spend tuition 2 years in a community college, then you spend 2 years upper division. If you do your last 2 years of a bachelor's at National University, you're going to pay almost $30,000. If you do your last 2 years of a bachelor at UCLA, you're going to pay just upwards of $25,000. And let me tell you, the experience at National University, not at all comparable with UCLA. So again, they're going to induce you, they're going to promise you all this good stuff. Think long and hard, please, or one is foreign. As I said before, don't confuse schooling with education, but at the same time, the end of schooling doesn't have to mean the education either. After you graduate from school, you have the rest of your life to keep on learning. After specialization, you have the rest of your life to seek more breadth. And so, once you graduate, if you weren't able to take that course in James Joyce as an undergraduate, well, now you can still read James Joyce, and you don't have to take a course. You've learned how to learn, presumably, as part of your education. As I say, I worked for LA Unified, and we used to hear, you should be a lifelong learner, by which they meant you'll be paying tuition to National University for the rest of your life. No. That's not what lifelong learning has to mean. I'll give you an example from my own case. Okay, I mentioned the importance of an AA degree. I neglected to mention, but I will now. Does anybody know what CLEP is? It's a standardized examination. Basically, if you had experience either before or in high school or otherwise before college, and you think you can pass a basic course, you can apply. It's a national program and pay the tuition, basically. Take the exam. If you pass the exam, you get credit for that course in your transcript. I did that with algebra because although I could do math, I really didn't like it. And the last math course I took was Algebra 2 in high school, and I lost interest and I barely got out of it. I could do the work, but I just didn't care. So I took a CLEP exam to get out of algebra as a college requirement, and I did it. I had enough knowledge of algebra from high school, and that was fine. So I didn't really like math. But as time goes on, I've talked to mathematicians, and I come to realize that I might have made a mistake, because I thought of math as numbers crunching. And it turns out when I listen to mathematicians talk about math, they use terms like elegance and symmetry and beauty. And I come to realize that there's probably more to math than just crunching numbers, and I miss that, but that's okay. I have some time. And well, let's see, I could reach up, I'm not gonna do it, I could reach up on my shelf here. I've got a stack of math books to the ceiling of my study here that I'm gonna get to eventually. I'm going to remedy that deficit. Another thing that I learned whatever economics I've learned from studying philosophy and studying sociology, not by studying formal economics. And I think I've made some wise economic decisions in my life because of my philosophy and sociology background. And I've heard some people, David Graeber, for example, is saying this: if you want to study economics, if you want to understand how the economy works, let's put it that way, the best thing to do is not necessarily to study economics. Okay, but I want to read some economics. I may not take an Econ 101 course, but there are some technical things I don't understand. And I've already started reading some of those books. Some of those are down there on the floor in front of my desk. So I'm busy doing other things. But yeah, I still got some time. I told you before, try not to be poor. But if worse comes to worse, if you're poor, at least there are cheap books. You don't have to be bored. As Kingman Brewster said, you get a liberal education, you don't have to be bored. I think people think, when you get old, you become boring and stupid, because we've known lots of older relatives who are boring and stupid. I think, though, they're probably boring and stupid when they're old because they were boring and stupid when they're young. They didn't avail themselves of an education. And if you don't when you're young, you will be also. But if you avail yourselves of an education when you're young, it should carry on with you until or unless Alzheimer's takes over. And by the way, I've got the bad news for you. Most of us are going to die choking in our own vomit, because most of us are going to die of Alzheimer's because we'll live long enough to do that. Why is cancer the leading cause of death? It didn't used to be. Well, it's the leading cause of death because medical science has gotten so good that we live longer. We live long enough to get cancer and Alzheimer's. If you were 30 years old in a pre-industrial society, you were an old man. If you were a king and you lived to 50, you were an old man. Okay, so our medical technology has extended our lifespan, and that also means that there will come a time probably when our minds will decline, most of us. Anyway, I hope it hasn't happened for me yet, but until it does, I still got all kinds of things to read. I'm retired from my day job, so I don't have, the wolf's not at the door, and I don't have to script and scrape. I'm teaching philosophy class. I only have one class this semester because I like to do it. Wild horses couldn't drag me away. But that gives me still a lot of time to study, a lot of time to learn some new things. And you too, to whatever extent, whatever extent you have to work, whatever extent you have free time. If you have any free time, with an education, you have the wherewithal to do the same thing. So learning doesn't have to stop just when schooling stops. Yes, you will become narrower as you go from freshman year to senior year. If you go to graduate school, you become narrower still. But even that's not the end of the story. Education is the best gift you can give yourself, and it's a gift that no one else can give to you. I couldn't give you an education. We'll talk about this when we come to talk about Socrates. Socrates says, there's no such thing as teaching. There is learning, but learning, of course, he has a particular take on that. I, Socrates, couldn't give you wisdom, he says, but you can attain it if you work for it. Nobody else can give it to you. Nobody else can take it away from you. An educated person is capable of enjoying life much more than an uneducated person. Education is a gift no one can rob from you. It's a lifelong gift that keeps on giving, even for in some cases, really long. I don't know if there's a causal relationship here. We shouldn't confuse causality with correlation, but I do notice that a number of major philosophers lived fairly long lives and were pretty much compos mentis until they left. Bertie Russell died when I was in high school at the ripe old age of 98, and he was still Bertie Russell. Philippa Foot was at UCLA for many years, died at the age of 90. Karl Popper died some years ago at 92. Claude Lévi-Strauss, 101. Hans-Georg Gadamer recently, 102. Now again, I don't know, but if your neural pathways are strengthened over your life, they'll probably be a little stronger into old age, and who knows? But we carry on, until we can. What did Plato have Cephalus say to Socrates in the Republic? If men are sensible and good-tempered, old age is easy enough to bear. If not, youth as well as old age is a burden. I like Thomas Jefferson's analogy here. Commodities are things which are scarce. What is economics? It's the study of scarcity. And most commodities are like that. Education, though, insofar as it's a commodity, is one commodity which is an exception. It is not subject to scarcity. If I have a lot of money, that means you don't have a lot of money. That's the problem we're seeing in this country with the mega rich. Jeff Bezos is about to become the first trillionaire. This is not unrelated to the fact that there are tons and tons of people sleeping on the sidewalks under the overpasses not far from where I live here in downtown LA. But education is not like that. If I have a lot of education, am I robbing you? No. If you have a lot of education, are you robbing me or the person next? No. We can all have as much as we can handle. It's not subject to scarcity. Jefferson's metaphor was a candle. I have a candle, and you have a candle, and mine's lit, and I give you a light from mine. Does my light diminish? No. Yours increases, the general illumination increases. It's kind of a win-win situation. It seems to me that education has that a very strong thing going for it. Well, that brings us to the end of the first lecture. So